What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Mayrand podcast. Today, my guest is Jason Arens. Jason is heavily involved in the ski industry. On one hand, as a marketing director and co-owner at Surface Skis, Joystick, and Causwell, and on the other hand, as a freeski judge who's been heavily involved in that side of the sport for over 10 years now. Jason has now pretty much become the worldwide reference for freeski judging. He's been a part of the Olympics, X Games, Do Tour, World Championships, World Cups, and much, much more. 3 years ago, I got Jason on the podcast to learn about freeski judging. As much as I love freeskiing and had been following it my whole life, I also knew I was clueless about what was going on behind the scenes, so I was super curious to learn about it. A few months later, Jason poked me and told me I should attend a FIS judging clinic he was putting on in Montreal. Flash forward to 3 seasons later, I've now judged over 20 events ranging from the lowest of levels to the World Cup level with Jason as a head judge last season. What started out as a genuine interest into a side of the sport I wasn't knowledgeable about is now taking big chunks of my seasons thanks to Jason. So I thought it would be nice to link back up with him to talk about comp skiing and where it's at, but also do another judging podcast now that I'm into it as well. In this episode, we talked about freeski judging and went deep into it. We talked about the 2025 X Games, the current state of pipe skiing, the intricacies of freeski judging, the fact that he's going to be a head judge next season at the Winter Olympics in Italy. At the end, we also touched on the business side he's involved in with surface skis and how the industry is shaken up with tariffs from the US. Plus, we also touched on last season's rebirth of the outerwear brand Causwell. This episode is presented by Surface Skis. Surface has been in business for over 20 years now. And with Jason Arens behind the wheel as marketing director for the past 6 years, the brand has seen an epic resurgence. While many brands have steered away from park skiing in the past decade, Surface Skis is staying true to it. Their 2026 lineup has everything a park skier could want for this upcoming season. They've got some of the dopest graphics in the game, and I can personally attest that their skis are awesome. I've ridden both the Upper and the Sniper in the past 2 seasons, and I love them. They're super fun riding both in the park and all around the mountain and have been super durable. Plus, they support a ton of dope athletes from all around the world and are always down to support them, whether it's through events, video projects, or even giving them pro models. Also, Surface Skis is hooking up the podcast listeners with a special discount. They're offering a 15% discount on all of their 2026 skis with the code Mayrand Podcast. The code Mayrand Podcast is valid on all 2026 pair of Surface Skis until October 1st, 2025. So all you got to do is go on surfaceskis.com, find a pair of skis that you like, and at checkout, apply the code Mayrand Podcast, and you've got it 15% off a new pair of skis. Support companies who support skiing. Support Surface Skis. Big thanks to the sponsors, Surface Skis, Access Board Shop, and Dick Hans Restaurants. Also, huge shout out to the patrons on Patreon. Let's go. Mr. Jason Arens, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been what, 3 years?
Yeah, I think so. I believe the last time I was living in Sweden for the summer with my wife.
Nice.
Pre finding out we were pregnant and the new child now 2 years old.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
So much has changed.
No, but stoked to talk to you because you influenced a lot of what I'm doing these days with that podcast.
Yeah, it's cool because I feel like after like that podcast, I think was one of the. I mean, definitely we had talked a little bit prior to that, but then the podcast was the most that we had ever spoken directly to one another. And Since then, it seems like we're in constant communication and convinced you to get into judging, which again, I think you're a perfect fit for this line of work.
Yeah, I think I'm a good example of how judging is perceived in free skiing because as much as I was a ski nerd, I never thought really about judging. I had judged some independent events. I had my own idea, but when I was watching an event, as much as I was not thinking about how judging was being done, I was also clueless about how it was being done. So it's kind of crazy. Now looking back, I was taking notes to the episode, to talk about judging, and I was like, damn, it's two different worlds. While how I went about our episode 3 years ago, I was completely clueless about what the judging is in freeskiing, how it's done, how, inside and out.
Totally. And that's, I mean, I think that our sport at times is doing people a disservice with how the values that are placed on this sport are not necessarily continued to be reinforced to the general public, as well as like core viewers, people that are spending a ton of time watching skiing have favorites and different preferences that might not align with what we know as the criteria. So
Mhm.
I mean, there's a good percentage of people that are fans of skiing that watch skiing, but I mean, it takes a lot of energy to dump into trying to figure out why the scores come out as they are, and as why, what the process is, what the methodology behind coming out with these rankings really is. So yeah, I think it's got to be really interesting for you, seeing as the intro class pretty much that I was given during the last recording, and then now a couple years of judging under your belt, and it just is probably night and day as to the way you look at it and
Yeah.
understand and perceive these runs.
Yeah. And I think a big part is for the public, let's say, it's that for a while skiing events weren't standardized, so every event would have a different format and different judging, a way of being judged, and even to this day, like, you have formats like do tour or natural selection that are head to head, and you have jib league or other stuff like level one rail jams that were rider judged, or the b dog off the leash, they're all rider judged. So it's hard to have a common perspective of judging because it's always different. But one thing I realized with your episode and with getting into judging is, okay, well, that's for those type of events, but for the main circuit, let's say in these times, that is World Cups, Olympics, all that, there is an actually standardized way that has been thought through and through. And when I went to the clinic, I was like, okay, shit. As much as nothing is perfect in life, that formula is pretty fucking strong.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like every judge is a human. So like when using that, the methodology that we're creating to judge, there are mistakes. There's bound to be mistakes, but in reality, for this sport to be adopted and accepted by the main ski organizing governing body being FIS, there needs to be structure and predictability, because a lot of resources go into supporting athletes and their pursuit of this trajectory. And so when there's a lot of people aligning to try to achieve success in one discipline, these things end up getting a little bit more standardized, just because you have a lot more people taking notes and there's checks and balances on either side that are all pushing it into one direction, which becomes very standardized in the way you have to look at it to achieve fairness and to try to give everyone the same shot when they show up at one of these events. And that's the interesting part about all these new events and side events like Jib League. I think is amazing. But the thing about that is, now as it's becoming popular, now they'll have accountability as to how people are moving into finals, how people are winning, rather than just having this kind of, we're the ones in charge and we say it. Now as it gets more popular and continued in the future, I see that being a really a new bridge for them to cross in how are they explaining these criteria, what do these criteria actually mean, and how are we adhering to these criteria to produce a winner, despite the criteria being completely different than we see in a World Cup field. They're not looking for someone to do a double 16 blunt, and then the person that spins the most while grabbing the most ends up being on top of the podium. So
Mhm.
it's conflicting ideals, but also lending to lead in the same direction ultimately. And that the more competitors, the more at stake in these competitions, the more structure will come out of it. And that just seems to be the way that freeski contests have gone, and judging in general in all sports seems to go, because of the accountability necessary to
Mhm.
validate these results continuing.
Yeah. I think the three things you said, you know, are great: fairness, predictability, and accountability. Because let's say you're doing a independent rail jam like Epic that I've been head judging for the past 3 years. At some point, the guys are there to have fun. They're there to put on a show. They understand the criterias, but are they going in depth about the criterias? Not that much, because it's a one-off. If someone isn't on the podium, will they ask if they finished seventh or eighth? Not really. At the end of the day, it's done. But when you get into the fifth circuit, with the everything is interlinked between the national level events and the NORAMs and the World Cups and the Olympics and the different countries and the spots you have in the national teams, then for better or for worse, that's where the eyes coming into the criterias, into the small details, because the devils are in the details. Because if someone finishes 12th instead of 13, it can influence a spot on the national team or a spot in the World Cup. And then the World Cup, everything is intertwined, that it makes those 3 points that you said really important, and that it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just I mean, a lot of people might even have issues with the way that these things are judged, or when they're watching it from a core perspective, might not feel that the sport is aligning with their values as a core participant. But
Mm-hmm.
in reality, like this is just kind of the trajectory of a competitive environment. When the parameters are set behind something like this, and there is accountability and there needs to be predictability, then the structure progresses at a pretty consistent rate, as to where the maneuvers you see these athletes trying are in oftentimes the the most highly rewarded. So the athletes are trying to benchmark what they're doing against the people that are being rewarded. They want to
Mm-hmm.
understand that when they get to that level, they land the same tricks as the person that has been rewarded. They will continue to be rewarded for that. Granted, the sport moves, and those people that were being rewarded for that will likely be doing new runs by that time, but still that predictability and that kind of roadmap as to how to get to be a recognized skier in that format
Mm-hmm.
kind of gets established. And then you look at how many different events are touched under this umbrella, because FIS has essentially taken over the entire contest series
Mm-hmm.
within skiing. Like, we have independent high level events, we have independent low level events, we've got independent events all over the place, but the real thread between all of them is the FIS involvement, as to the structure, as to the parameters with which we're judging, and that kind of stuff. So it does end to kind of have that consistent trajectory throughout.
I think you led on to something. Maybe I'm gonna change a bit what you were saying, but I think a part of what you were saying is predictability, is making sure that, let's say, if something is scored well in one event, it will also be scored in another event, so that it all makes sense. But that's something that is hard also for judges, because you every time it's a different course, every time it's a different panel. Again, going back to being human, there's a part that is objective criterias, and there's a part that is subjective to the panel on that day. But also, it's also relative to what the other guys are doing. So if on one day a guy does a trick that stands out in that field, maybe the other time it doesn't stand out in that field.
And it's kind of also about like how tuned in the judges working that contest are to skiing in a broader sense, as well as the last contest that even just happened. Because
Mm-hmm.
like at a World Cup level, that's something that's really been important, especially with these athletes that are doing it for a living consistently, week in and week out.
Mm-hmm.
They need predictability. They need to
Yeah.
understand why that result happened the previous week and what they're working towards the following week. But with that, none of us judges are, as I'll do in air quotes, professional. We're all doing this on a very part-time basis, and we're not going to every single contest in sequence throughout the year. So when I show up at a contest in locks in January and I wasn't at the contest the week prior, unless I did my due diligence, I watch the competition, I'm keeping up on the results, I read through the trick identification, stenos, all that kind of stuff, I could be completely lost. And like, precedents are continuously being set within this environment as to this trick stacks up against this trick. And that's how the riders are looking at it. And like, to bring it to SBS judging, I think we touched on it in our first recording, section by section,
Yeah.
which has now become the bread and butter of the World Cup slopestyle environment, taking into account each feature individually and then having an overarching score, taking a look at the composition, which is just the components that are not looked at when you're looking at the individual trick difficulty per feature. When your entire run is broken into numbers like that, then the athletes would be doing themselves a disservice to not be looking at those numbers and trying to see
Mm-hmm.
how they make up points compared to somebody else. And essentially, we get almost handcuffed to those numbers. Okay, we established in this big air competition that this trick beats this trick. That means in slopestyle, when those two tricks are done next to each other and they're done well, they're grabbed, they're landed well, there's no major mistakes, they need to be rewarded as we've already demonstrated in prior competitions. Aside from when there are conversations happening with the community that we're trying to get these checks and balances to understand that we might be off in some scenarios. And generally that's the feedback that we get the most consistently is when we misevaluate something and then the athlete base comes back and say, well, man, I don't know, that trick's a lot easier than this trick, and I think you guys messed up. That result lives, but then the course of the sport may change and veer off from there.
But what makes it so great, let's say, in spite of a better word, what makes it so great to be judging is, I compare it a lot to the game Clue, where you got to use your brain to like figure out stuff because there are so many variables. Let's say we established that a trick is better than another trick, right? But aside from the trick written down, like what the trick is, was it more flippy or more spinny? What grab did you do? How long was the grab held? How great was the grab held? Did you go big or didn't you go big? Was it stomp? Was it not stomp? Was the takeoff good? Was it not good? So then, yeah, there's the trick, but there's so many things that you can use to decipher the value of it that sometimes it's hard when, for a lot of lower level events, we've done meetings before the event where we try to talk to the kids competing or the athletes to try to get their sense of that, try to do a back and forth. And a lot of times they go back to us asking, oh, is that trick harder or that trick? Or in your perception, trying to understand the judge's point of view. But a lot of time it's like, yeah, we have a point of view in a broad sense, let's say, but inside of a comp, the trick you're doing is one variable out of 25. So it's hard to give an answer because we'll see on that day how big you go, the grab, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
There's always going to be room for subjectivity in the way that we evaluate this stuff too, because you don't want it to be a rubric where we can tell them beforehand that this trick beats this trick, kind of without any variables in there. That creates a rubric style judging system that we've always been striving to push against. So it really, there are so many variables, even within each individual trick, as you're saying with grab, where on the ski did they grab? How did that grab influence the rotation? The rotation itself, like being flippy versus more flat, being upright, the takeoffs, are they rushed? Is it perfect? The pop, there's so many different variables that there is no black and white. Like, as you said, very gray. We're right in the middle. And it is, as a judge, your ability to pick up on all of those keys that you're looking at while evaluating an individual maneuver and try to consistently utilize that information that you're getting through watching the contest throughout to produce an accurate ranking. So it's very analytical in how you'd actually look at it. But at the same time, there is not an exact science because of the subjectivity to it. And there are certain riders that will do something that just felt so much so from a judging standpoint that it needs to be rewarded because it just is exactly what we were looking for in that scenario. Maybe in that situation, it's a 180 or 360 less than the person who's winning. There's room for that, but there needs to be reason behind it. And within the subjective nature of being able to evaluate this stuff, there always has to be objective reasons for your subjective evaluation.
And now it's time for a first sponsor break. Decans is a family-owned fast food restaurant chain in the Montreal region with 14 locations now. 70 years after opening their first location on Montreal's Boulevard Pineuf, Decans is still focused on what matters most. The same menu with great food made out of quality ingredients. I've said it, I'm a Decans super fan, and many people ask me what's my go-to. It's their famous Wally Burger, a double cheeseburger with slices of pepperoni on top. It's so good. Also, Decans is now selling their famous sauce in their restaurants and in many Metro grocery stores throughout Quebec. Plus, they've put a bunch of great recipes to go along with it on their website at decansauce.com. Also big news, they've recently opened 2 new locations on the South Shore of Montreal, one in Belleuil and one in Boucherville. Support companies who support skiing. Support Decans restaurants.
And something that really surprised me, not surprised me, well, maybe surprised me, but is we kind of have an assumption for judging or maybe for politicians or for anything that is like unrelated, that is far from you. Let's say thinking that judges are super biased or that will say, oh, that trick is whack. It's not something I like, so it'll have a bad score. But I've been really impressed about how we do talk about, oh, I think that trick is whack. But when it comes down to judging on the actual judging day, let's say, we don't. We just judge what is being done and how it's being done. And
Absolutely.
like people are super good at people, I mean, in the judging panels are super good about like putting their personal opinions aside and, taking the job really seriously, even though we're all, no one is there taking themselves too seriously. But when we're judging, everyone is like game on.
And I mean, as a group of ski nerds, which just about every panel is, everyone has their preferences and things that they think are cooler, skiers that they appreciate more. But I think that's a big part of being a judge, is being able to leave that at the door and being able to objectively look at the difficulty of some of the tricks that you might not like, to be able to reward those against others that you might have liked more. And I mean, if we're just going for doing a run that I like the most, maybe no one's spinning over a 9. But in reality, when people are doing 16s, 18s, and 19s, and there's no issues with any portion of the trick, the takeoff's good, the trajectory's good, they popped off the lip well, they got a grab at an adequate time, they held that grab, the body position was good, the rotation was high, the axis was interesting. Those are things that build a competitive trick that needs to be rewarded. And I really do think that all the judges that we work with, specifically on a World Cup level, but also on the like Continental Cup level, have a really good understanding of that. And I see very little bias showing. Probably the most bias I ever see is when a previously established skier, somebody that made it pretty far into skiing, to a professional extent, comes in and sits in a judging booth, and now they want their opinions heard, but in reality they're not taken out for the subjective nature of what they're bringing to the table, and that's, other than that, like when people are coming in just on a judging side, I rarely ever see that. It's mainly from athletes that have more of that perception of what is or isn't difficult based on what is and isn't difficult to them and how they would approach it.
Mm-hmm. And that's also a good point that you lead on, is I think difficulty is super hard to judge sometimes. Because let's say on my end as a filmer, I have on my end as a skier what I think is hard, what is not hard, but also I have a perspective of a filmer where filming with someone, a switch lip 2 will be easy peasy. Dom Laporte, I would film with him, you would do 20 in a run and land all of them. But for another skier, they'll never do it. So then
Exactly.
There's two things. There's the objective thing of, is a dub 23 hard? Fuck yeah. But then, okay, then let's go into the gray area. Sometimes it's hard comparing two runs because you know that for a certain rider, that certain trick is easy, but you also got to be objective. A certain trick for someone may be super hard and for someone else super easy, or the other way around. And it's something you don't necessarily have an answer to. You got to be cautious.
Yeah. That's really tough too, because some people, like, you kind of assume at the highest level that people in some way, shape, or form are playing to their strengths. Mm-hmm. They're not doing something that's just, this is the thing I'm the worst at, I'm going to try the hardest possible thing in the direction that I'm worst at, with the grab I'm worst at, with the axis I'm worst at. They tend to play towards their strengths, and people's strengths are different. So kind of what it's boiled down to, specifically at a World Cup level, to me, is percentages and analytics of those percentages, being able to look at the field as a whole and understanding how many are capable of individual maneuvers and what grabs or body positions are leading to get them to that rotation that's above everybody else, as to how it gets valued. For example, looking at big air, a couple years ago, double 18s were kind of the threshold. That's where everything was going. And then we had the conversation between athletes. What is more difficult in a double 18? A trailing tail grab or a leading tail grab? It's kind of split, because some athletes have a different perspective on it. Some people learned it with trailing tail versus some people learning it with lead tail. If you think about the physics of it, it would make sense that leading tail has to be the one that best influences that spin. You're grabbing into the spin. You're able to not reach away from the spin and hold into that. So then we kind of, after watching for years and not necessarily having an answer right off the bat, because in the beginning, when two people are doing each, two people are doing dub 18 trailing tail, two people are doing double 18 leading tail, you have to treat it as equal. But then
Mhm.
based on the percentage of people learning those tricks and the other tricks that kind of get influenced by those rotations and maneuvers, then you start to build a case, a long-term case in your head as to the objective difficulty of individual grabs within rotations and type of rotations,
Yeah.
which builds, again, like you're saying, how many different variables can we possibly take into account? But that's the job of a World Cup judge. And I don't know anybody that stepped into a World Cup booth that takes that position lightly. Everyone
Mhm.
is trying to do their best, trying to factor in as much as physically possible, and wants to do the best job they possibly can, because most of us never achieve that level of skiing in our professional careers, and we want to do whatever we can to service those top riders in the most fair and accurate way on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm. And you're right. I would think that we see it a lot, referring to the lead tail. We see it a lot with lead Japans, where
Exactly.
it seems to make sense that it is leading towards where you're spinning. That would help you. So there's that part of like what is helping you and what is not helping you. Another thing that I notice in terms of what gets rewarded is sometimes being creative in a way where you're not necessarily doing something that stands out, that is something that others can't do because of difficulty. It's more you're doing something a bit out of the box that is, let's say, as difficult or that other people could do, but you're standing out through being creative in a way, thinking of something that others don't think of. Where um, there's a Ben Barkley, to not start naming names, that was doing a bio 8 out, front bio 8 out of a rail this winter, and
Yep.
it scored well, and it was something that really stood out because we never see that. And then I think on Instagram or on other comps, I kind of saw more people doing it. And I was like, oh, okay, are they catching on that it is something that is hard, but that is also doable? They just weren't thinking of doing it, beforehand.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, with that trick specifically, I believe it was Tormod that did that the first time I ever saw it in a competition, and it was
Mhm.
like kind of in that instance criminally undervalued, because a bio 810 versus a cork 810 out of a rail, there's something to be accounted for. There's a reason why he was the only one to do it. Then you start seeing Ben, you start to see Tormod bringing it back with spins on, like world champs, for example. I think 3 riders in that 16-person final did a bio 8 off of a rail, 2 of which spinning into that bio 8.
Mhm.
So it like proves that there's an element to it that can be figured out, but it also stands separate from the cork. And it's kind of like that. The riders, I mean, they'd be doing themselves a disservice not to pay attention to how we reward that stuff.
Mhm.
We're open and willing to accepting feedback as to whether or not we over or undervalue things. And that kind of
Mhm.
gets logged back into our mental book as to how we approach it moving forward. Because one piece of advice as to us over rewarding something or under rewarding something is not changing anything from that point forward, as a fact. It's like, we're not going to listen to one rider come up and say this trick shouldn't have been scored so high, it should have been down here, and just say, you know what, man, you were right, we're never going to do that again. It all gets taken with a grain of salt. You have to understand who's sending that message to you, who's the one that's telling you that, how does it influence them, where does it stand up against everything else. And we're still having critical thoughts and evaluations within that, but it all gets logged in. Like we hear that feedback and we try to utilize that feedback for what it is to do better on our end on a contest to contest basis.
And now it's time for another sponsor break. Axis Board Shop has been dedicated to freeskiing since its inception in 2002. At a time when some people and brands were still looking down on freeskiing, Axis believed in it fully. After 20 years of supporting athletes, movies, competitions, events, and so much more, Axis is still going strong. Above all, Axis is a ski shop where you'll find everything you need for skiing, snowboarding, or skateboarding. Check them out in store in Saint-Sauveur or online at axisboutique.com. Support companies who support skiing. Support Axis Board Shop. We kind of went over the predictability thing a few minutes ago. I just want to close that thing. I had in mind Burke Rude won Core Big Air 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, with like a double cork pretzel flip where it wasn't never been done, but it was also looking janky.
Yep.
How he got out of that spin and did it. And that was a big thing where we already had that talk off the podcast, but I think it's a good example where it was never been done. It was insane. It got rewarded. But then in terms of predictability, I think you guys, you know, you guys made it a point in comps following that hey, if you do it that way again, you won't get hooked up in the same way. It get my whole point with that example is some things can be predictable, but also they can not be, because there are factors just like, hey, it was never been done before, whereas now since it's been done, we expected to see it done properly.
Yep. And that's kind of the thing with all that. It is like that trick specifically was never before done, and it was done in a way that in the moment, like, and the conversations leading up to that, we were still trying to wrap our heads around what it was. Is it a pretzel? Is it just something where he gets his feet up to a point and then cats out of it? And ultimately, kind of what that trick specifically, and that event specifically, guided our view as to how we handle the pretzels and those other obscure rotations within skiing, where now there's a certain standard and predictability that those are held to, being these never before done tricks that involve a pretzel. You don't just throw form out of the way. You can't get away with anything. And in any other trick, your hands going over your head like that in a full-blown cat twist out would be negatively affected. If you did a dub 19 and any part of your rotation, your hands are over your head like that, you're getting hammered. So there has to be standards that are enforced between the two, as well as the how obvious it was that it was an actual opposite direction rotation. Because that trick specifically, if you look at it and argue with me all you want on this one, sitting years later looking at that trick, we way overvalued that one. It is not what they said it was. Period. It is not a pretzel, in my opinion, in any way, shape, or form. After looking back at it, it's a cat twist. It's a rotation that he sets. He's setting into switch double 12, and then he throws his legs out to stop the rotation. So it's almost like an in-air save under control, where he lands at a predictable place every time. You look at what A-Hall's doing is a pretzel. What Teapot's doing can debatably be a pretzel, depending on whether or not you buy that a head dip in the first rotation constitutes flipping in an opposite direction. When people are really starting to spin in one way and spin in another direction, that's not debatable, when you can clearly and obviously see it. But that scenario specifically was almost trying to trick our perception as to what we understand a new rotation to be. And at what point does it define the new rotation starting or finishing?
Yeah, makes sense. And again, we're deep into
the weeds.
Detail. Yeah. How I thought personally it was overjudged at that point was really just execution wise, having the ends up, and I was like, okay. But then again, it is a judge board. You are humans, and there are other factors. That's something I learned is, as a viewer now, I have my own opinion, but you got to realize that how it happens is you got 6 to 9 people, depending on the format, that are all talking and debating with their different point of views, that come out with something that gets valued. Whereas, if you're not in that discussion, it's hard to, if you are not in that discussion, there are stuff you're missing out on. And yeah, sometimes it's clear as day. Someone lands on their back, no shit, they're going to get a bad score. But when it's more,
well, it's more about the nuance that you're looking at. And, I mean, with those things too, I think a lot of people don't see the pre-work that goes into these contests. And we're watching the practice, we're discussing amongst ourselves, specifically so with Big Air, let's use an example. We're trying to take note of everything we've seen. We're trying to take note of where some of these tricks that people clearly aren't doing their finals trick all the time in qualifying or in practice. So you kind of have to understand the progression as to where these tricks go and how that might be rewarded. But then you're also dealing with the fact that just a human nature, we're put in a position often where 4 things that have never been done before happen right in front of us. And no matter how much we discuss them beforehand, they're variables, as we're saying. How was the takeoff on theirs? Did they have the same trajectory and amplitude? Was the grab as locked as that other one? That you're now also factoring into these hypotheticals, these never before done tricks that before that contest were just an idea. And then you saw it in real time, and you have to be the person that's deciding how it stacks up against the other 3 that had never been done before.
Yeah. Well, you've just opened the door. Do you want to go in?
Got to.
Okay, X Games 2025,
Yes.
Big Air. That's an example.
Great example.
And
I was just going to reference this too, but I also was worried about opening this door. But since you're so you're going in there
you
for me,
opened it. You
we're
opened
in
it.
it.
I'm just stepping in it.
I'm
Okay.
here for it.
So everyone was killing it. Like Dylan Deschamps didn't score, didn't end up well, and he did a fucking switch triple bio, which was a been done before, but
Only by him, like
only by him,
realistically.
or
Yeah.
maybe if someone did it in the past and I don't know about it, I'm sorry, but it's rarely seen, and to me, it's fucking insane.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we get on the podium, there's Luca doing trip 19 blunt, right? And then
trip 19 blunt. Then he does the trip 21 blunt on his final hit. Yeah, you have T-Pod, who did the single best trip 21 that's ever been done in the history of skiing, winds up in fourth. You have Bate doing the switch tail butter trip 21 safety, and then you have Miro doing the double 23 lead Cuban. Before we get into talking about the finals, to touch on Dylan, like specifically, his trick, like as that trick scores against other tricks relatively, it's generally on the upper echelon, like, and just the sheer wildness of that rotation generally gets rewarded. But then comparing it to what we were in X Games, it became really tough because he was doing a trick that he's shown capable of doing on a much smaller jump, for which all the other riders were doing tricks that are not possible on a stadium jump. And then the body position for him is what really got him, like very wide leg stance, really, really hugging behind the thigh on that, which it makes sense. You're doing a switch triple bio, switch triple misty. Like you need to hold on to that rotation somehow. But that was, in that scenario, our differentiating factor as to how we could justify not rewarding it. And that's something too that the general public never hears. They never hear our discussion. And that was something that, like, we can touch on it in a bit with the private events, but Snow League, I thought, was doing that was very interesting, is they have a judging analyst on air that's breaking down in real time what they think the judges are looking at and how it'll stack up against everything else. And I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle to helping people understand and not just be pissed off that the person they wanted to win didn't.
I think, just to do a little shout out, that's something I really liked. So Will Tucker is a British.
Yeah, British.
He's a British judge that judges World Cup and is super involved, and he also does commentary for Fist streams. And so if you hear a British voice, that's him. And I thought he was super good this spring. Like, I watched a couple comps where he was talking, and you could hear 2/3 of it was like a commentator talking about the run, but then 1/3 was like having on real time a judge's opinion of what judges can be looking at. And I thought that was, at least from my nerd perspective, that was awesome to actually have it, someone who is a judge and that is giving that insight of what is being looked at, really, what was the mistake, without, sometimes the commentary will be over positive, like, hey, good job, whatever, and you're not getting into any gritty detail, whereas he was really like, oh, I think maybe Flora will be ducked a bit because that safety was short, or, and it's super relevant to that trick or that, run.
Yeah. And I mean, at first I thought that kind of information was only cool to us, as a judge, like hearing
Maybe
the validation.
It is. I don't know.
But in reality, no, I think it helps paint a bigger picture, because our only hope of these sports growing and more people watching is for people to better understand, so that they're not watching and feeling like the sport that they're paying attention to, they're wrong about, and they saw something wildly different, So the more, I think Will does a great job with that. Will's got a great speaking voice, and when he's put in those positions, it's interesting because you can see he can't turn that judging brain off. He is announcing, but he's got to have that intel. And like oftentimes he's announcing and I'm on the contest judging, and he's just kind of echoing the sentiment of what was actually talked about by the judges in real time to the viewers, justifying what we're doing. And that's something that I think every contest should have room for that. Like Snow League, adding that with Connor Manning as the snowboard judges analysis, I thought was awesome, because it's another piece of the puzzle to try to get people to understand this sport that is marginally ununderstandable. Like, I don't know how anyone could just watch this and be like, I get this right away. It makes perfect sense. Like, for most of the people, it's aerials with poles now, and that they try to grab their skis. So to create any type of methodology where it's explained to the general public, I think is huge for public understanding.
Yeah. And so to go back into X Games,
Yes.
and to how hard it is, and to your example that opened the door, that is, well, what happens and when you get 3 4 tricks that have never been done, how do you handle that? I had an instance with a friend who I skied park with 15 years ago, who was into it, was doing, did rails, did tricks on jumps, everything, but doesn't follow it anymore at all. And for whatever reason, I said, hey, watch on YouTube, go watch the stream of the X Games Big Air, just because once upon a time, a winning trick was a switch 1080. Now I knew what happened, and he texted me like, "Dude, what the fuck?" And he knows, and he knows I'm judging, and he's like, "How do you guys even know what's happening?" And it's
Yeah.
like, well, we do. We're fucking nerds, but also there is room for mistake because it is getting to that insane level. Like, I don't know if that's a secret, if I can tell it, but you told me that when Troy in the World Championships 3 4 years ago did a dub 21 or trip
Trip.
21,
Yeah.
trip 21, you guys almost missed it for an 18.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's the other thing about this is like, you have to be prepared for what you're about to witness. And I think that teapot situation is like the biggest one I can think of, where just, we weren't expecting it. He had done nothing in that contest to lead us to believe that he was capable of that. He had done nothing in practice. And in reality, you're lying if you say that a triple 18 and trip 21 don't look very similar.
Mhm.
When I started judging, it was a difference of tens and 12s. 10s and 12s are easy. Switch to forward to switch, or switch, forward. Tens and then you get to 14s. And that kind of bridged the first gap, where telling between it, was that a 10 or a 14? Well, it's pretty easy because the body arch, your back arches in a 14 in a way that people usually stay balled up with 10s. So we started looking at that, and that kind of became true. Then when you get 14 to 18, the body positions are very similar between 14 and 18. And you're kind of looking at general intensity of the rotation. How fast are they spinning? Because if we're sitting there counting rotations, there's no way. But then you peel back this next layer, and now you're talking about the difference between 18s and 21s. They're like, to be able to do that without looking at rotation right off the bat, it has to be such a gut reaction to the intensity, the amount of rotation going into it. It just has to be intuitive. Otherwise, you're going back and replaying everything. And like for us, intuitively, that 18, as we thought it was a 21, we thought it was an 18. It just seemed chill. Like it didn't seem that, it looked a little different. And I think there were a couple of us that were bringing it up and saying like, are we sure that was an 18? But in reality, our heads were not at that's possible. Our heads were at, you can't physically do more than that. Doing another 180, landing 19, that's possible. But a lot of judging is like understanding what to be prepared for. And a lot of times, like even when we're watching practice, we don't get to see that. We don't get to see where they're going to take it, and when they make a switch in real time. And like the other harsh reality of this is our timeline for evaluating this stuff. We're on a very quick timeline, especially so in that Georgia contest. Weather was always an issue. We're trying to whip through it. So when you see something that just feels like a known entity, you know exactly where that known entity goes in. You just plug it in. You don't really think too much about it. But then like, that was the thing that I was proud of. At least 50% of our judges there is they had the gut feeling that something was up. They're like, I just feel like that was a little bit different. And now, now what I look at with trip 18s versus trip 21s, it's that last flip. Like, are they doing a 3 out of it, or are they doing a 7 out of it? Yeah. And then you get to the whole next complication of it, where people like Ed Joy, who have always been playing with the rotations and are not doing conventional rotations. For example, like trip 16 is like a pretty easy one normally, which would be 7-3-5. But then when people start doing like 5, switch 9, those kind of rotations, that also really throws it off. But it does happen. I will say, in the history of like the World Cups that I've been at, it's happened very few times where we've actually been caught off guard by a rotation. Specifically, so now jumping back in time with this year's X Games, that was like our only focus, is
you were ready for what was coming.
And now that's how I jump into any big air. Like as a head judge, which is the capacity that I'm generally filling at any World Cup or X Games now, I just want to make sure that, as also the trick caller, whatever I say I think it is that they're evaluating based on is what it is. flat out. I don't want to be wrong. That's the one thing I don't want to be wrong. I've been wrong before. It's not a great feeling when you have to go back and reevaluate something.
And to add on to that, just as a perspective for outsiders who don't judge, or for me that didn't judge before, is we won't miss a trick for many of us nerds when we're watching it in the park randomly, but that's not what we're talking about at that point. Is I compare it to, those big college exams or whatever, where you're 4 hours deep and your brain is melting, because for some events you're at your, in, let's say, judging a big air, you're at your 183rd jump that you're judging.
Yep.
And you haven't had a break, and it's windy and you're cold and you don't have the best angle of view, and missing a trick versus not missing it, or, in terms of knowing the rotation, is not about closing your eyes. It's just being just a bit off for a millisecond. And then you're like, oh, fuck.
Totally.
So,
and I mean, that's
the level of attention and energy and the toll that it takes. Like, I've had in my first year, I was surprised, like, getting out of a judging day and my brain was fried. I was like, I had a headache.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, like, I've had it to the point where I finish a contest and I'm so drained by it, and then all I want to do is sleep, but my sleep is a continuation of the contest, and I'm just judging the same contest in my head while I'm sleeping. And that's like the least restful sleep you can ever ask for. Specifically, that usually was like USASA Nationals for me, where you're just judging from 7 a.m. until 4:30. Then you take an hour break, and then you start rail jam from 5:30 until 9:30. You're breaking a bunch of ties. You're going into it, but it's grueling. And like, that's generally my rule of thumb, is when we get critiques about the judging from anyone that's not an athlete or a coach, my baseline is, did you pay as much attention to the competition as the judges did? Because unless you paid attention to the contest as the judges did, it's going to be really hard to trust and validate your opinion about that result. And in reality, I don't think that any spectator has ever paid the amount of attention to detail that judges do in and out of these contests. Because, like, even me, a nerd, watching these contests at home for my own information, to try to make sure I'm not losing a step in understanding where the sport is, how something was valued. If I'm at home, I'm in a comfortable situation. I'm not responsible for that result. Even if I'm really excited about that contest, my mind wanders. I'm not paying complete attention. I'm catching the highlights. I'm watching the replays, but your mind wanders when you're just a general spectator. And being a judge in these scenarios, especially on the qualifying days, means that you're dedicating 100% of energy and all of your attention to one thing all day. And that really can be a lot on anyone's mind.
Yeah. And I think that leads, again, where we keep going off of it, and we'll manage to talk about the X Games Big Air, but that goes back into it when we talk about energy, because X Games put you in a weird situation of, X Games back in not too far past had 3 events: slope, big air, pipe, right? And to my memory, it was on 4 days, from the Thursday to the Sunday. Now it's not 4 days, it's 3 days, and it's not 3 events, it's 5.
5 events.
Because they added
knuckle,
rail jam, and the knuckle huck. Yeah. So as a judge yourself, you had to judge with men and women. Then it's 10 events in 3 days with the best of the best in the world.
And the tough thing with that too is, like, we're not dealing with qualifying in X Games. It's just finals. So we're just getting thrown into the consequential portion of the event right off the top. And this year was a bit different with the way that we did, like, the run split. So there were kind of the qualifying period, then the finals, where they would actually have their final scores. But it's a lot. And, like, honestly, this year at X Games, I feel like I understood what we were going to be up against in big air specifically. Men's big air was the one that I had on my radar for months, knowing that if the right 4 people make it to finals, this is going to be an absolute bloodbath of tricks that we've never seen before. And that was something that, with my judges, again, like the judges that I've got on X Games, I am so confident in these guys that I'm working with. I've worked so many events with them. We have so many side conversations throughout the entire year to, like, see where balancing what we're looking at with this stuff. They're three of the best judges I've ever worked with, and Dan Allen, Toby Grotz, and Adam Frisell. And we're having these conversations not that week, like, but a month leading up to it. Just, hey, this person just did this in this contest. Do you think that they add this onto it and bring it to Aspen? Because Aspen has always been the venue where people do the one thing that they have never done before.
Mhm.
And this year specifically, and like maybe my downfall as part of my doing, but I was really pushing for that one jump format. That was my big takeaway from watching years of X Games Big Air is I don't want it to be about the tricks added up. I want the person that wins to be the one that does the one trick that's never been done before. So in that sense, knowing what we were coming into, knowing that, okay, we're about to start an event where you've got these heavy hitters there. They all want to push the sport. They all want to do it here on that jump right now. And it's going to be different than the World Cups, especially so in the way that it's rewarded, because it is not going to be about 2 jumps. The person that's best at 2 jumps might not have the advantage and have the single best individual jump. And oftentimes too, you look at a World Cup and the person that has the best jump of the day doesn't always win. Sometimes it's off the podium because they didn't have a second jump that stacked up. So understanding the state of the game, the conversations that were going into it, we were excited, but like I'd be lying if I wasn't saying we were nervous for it, specifically. So before the contest, my prediction for what would be the absolute wildest final that could possibly happen was T-Pod, Matej, Luca, and Miro, just because you knew what they could bring to the table. You know that if Ahal, if Bjerk, if Dylan, if Mac, if they land, they can get into that final and they'll have something equivocal. But those were the 4 that I knew could do something that had never been done before. And we knew T-Pod had the trip 21. We thought maybe he goes 23. We knew Luca had that trip 19 blunt. Kind of didn't really at the time seem possible to take that to 21, but still he had the switch trip 16 Esco, which now we've all seen in recent months has progressed to 18 in the World Champs and then landed 19 at 9. So that's past the X Games. So I don't know why I'm bringing that up, just for my
He
mental
did switch
capacity.
Trip 19?
Switch trip 19 Esco at 9s. Yeah.
Damn.
As well as the switch quad 14. So yeah, Luca's on one, but like Luca with the year he had, we just knew he was going to be bringing something special. And then Miro, we got the intel prior to the contest even started that he had done a 23 in training, a 23-year rotation that's never been done by a skier before. So we knew going into that qualification period that if these 4 guys land, this final is going to be nuts. And also a final at which, like, how do you differentiate this trick? So much understanding of the sport, NBDs, what influences body positions, what is and isn't a proper way of approaching this trick is all going into it. And then they all land, and just adding a whole nother variable to it that, like, at least we have the benefit of the doubt that most of the time when 4 people are trying a trick that's never been done before, 2 of them crash. Not the case in X Games. They all landed. That was the heaviest contest I've ever been a part of. Still facing like feedback on how the result turned out. And I've heard so many different combinations of that grouping of 4 being evaluated as top 3. But yeah, that was a heavy one.
So again, not to say that you're wrong or you're right or whatever, because I don't think that's the point. Because again, if anyone thinks that there is a clear answer when there's that level of never been done, it's like, I feel like it's a bit of bad faith at some point, because it's so. But I'm curious, can you take us through what was discussed in that booth on that night? Because it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback when we've had 6 months and we have the YouTube replays and we have the Megamos, and we have to go back to, you guys are human, so you can make mistakes. Everything we've discussed. There are, when judging, some predetermined after the years of what difficulty a trick is, but also when it's never been done. It's hard to compare, but then it's not only that it's 1 new trick, it's 3 new tricks that are all done differently by different people. You guys are tired because you've done 26 events in 3 days because X Games wanted to have a tight schedule. You want to go into it a bit? What was discussed in the room?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I'm trying to remember the order in which everything happened. I know T-Pod, I think so. T-Pod came out run 1, did the trip 21.
Perfect.
That trip 21 was perfect. The best one the sport's ever seen. The grab was awesome. He's changed his rotation to the first ones he was doing. Now the rotation is just a lot cleaner, in my opinion, a lot less like structured by 777.
Mhm.
Beautiful trip for trip 21, rewarded adequately, but ultimately, it's been done. He's
Mhm.
done that trick. He did that trick last year when he won the X Games previous. He's done that trick at World Champs. It's still a trick that is recognized as unbelievably difficult, one of the best, if not the hardest tricks that had been done to that point, but it's been done. And that was kind of a big factor in the way that we rewarded that one at first. And again, all these jumps were rewarded, but then it was like kind of theoretical comprehension as to where all this stands out. Then you get into Luca, who did his first run. He did the Trip 19 blunt. Perfect. That blunt being very difficult in a triple, just such a gnarly trick to really overcome for his first trick in there. He had done in qualifying. We saw it there. The grab was perfect. The trick was perfect. We rewarded it. But I believe at the time it was still below T-Pod's Trip 21, because even with the blunt and like maybe even debatably that that could have been rewarded above it because of the grab being so difficult.
I might be wrong, but I think it was above it. Anyways,
I'm not sure, because Luca came in on his last hit and that was when he did the 21 on the final hit of the comp, or was it final or second? I forget the order in which all of them happened. But then Matej comes out and does that switch tail butter Trip 21, and we rewarded it, like at the time even putting it in first place. But ultimately our sticking point, and this is the thing that I've heard the most feedback about this contest, is how didn't we reward Matej higher for doing a switch tail butter triple 21 safety? Trick was perfect, grab was there, landing was awesome, but in our eyes, in that never before done trick, compared to everything else and all of the perfection that we had already seen in the contest and that we were going to expect, we felt as a panel there was a little bit left to be desired on the tail butter specifically. Not to hold anyone to unrealistic standards, but like when you see Henrik do a switch tail butter off a jump and they're really like getting off those tails and having a real compression off the tails and sending it into that rotation, there is a standard for switch tail butters, which obviously has to be blurred when you're doing a 21 as compared to a switch tail butter cork 7 or something like that. But that was our reasoning in real time as to why the roof didn't get blown off on that. If he does tail butter on that in the way that Henrik has done switch tail butters on jumps, where you really see that tail flexing off the jump, he probably gets a 99 and nothing else catches him throughout the rest of the competition. But we thought, based on our understanding of it, we watched that so many times, and in reality, the tail butter nose butter thing has been the biggest subject of conversation in the contest world this year, because there's so little definition as to what merits a perfect tail butter and what is a mistake and a pre-spin, and thus it's almost all recorded or rewarded as equal. So we're trying to kind of hamper that in and get control as to how we reflect on those tail butters to make sure that proper tail butters are being rewarded for being extra proper, and the bad ones that are just pre-spins are not rewarded at all and are rewarded as a mistake, and keep the gray area out of that. It's going to be tough always, but in that scenario, we felt the tail butter could have been more accentuated, thus we held it a little bit back. He went into first at the time.
Another point on Matej, to me, I think, and I'm curious what was discussed, but to me, the grab is a major thing also, where it was safety.
It was safety, yeah.
What he was compared to was Luca with the insane blunt, trailing blunt, T-Pod with the high mute, and Miro with the lead Cuban.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, that was the thing that I probably received. I saw the most personal feedback about me as a judge on the internet. People calling me out for not liking safety. And it's like, ultimately, it's called safety for a reason. It's the easiest grab possible. But I'll throw in another piece of this equation. When you're doing a 21, do you think it's easier to grab a grab that leans into the spin and turns your body into kind of a torpedo to spin more? Or do you think an underboot grab that's holding you together might make it more difficult? And that's something that, like, the grab might have been an easier grab on paper, but possibly he was fighting even harder to get that 21 around because he was grabbing safety, not grabbing as the other three were doing grabs that really lean into continuing that rotation. I'd say the grab was a factor, but probably not to us as much as the tail butter specifically was.
But I'd say the trailing blunt from Luca probably didn't help because, and there, it's not in the direction of where he's spinning. He's holding it as far from his body as he can, and we never see people do those spinny, flippy tricks with a trailing grab like that and hold it together.
Exactly. And the level of risk brought into Luca's with like that trailing grab. So Luca's obviously, I mean, you can't say that grab's not harder, but I guess if you're comparing it to Miro's, when Miro is doing the 23, he's grabbing into the spin. Like maybe we can say it's harder to grab safety than it is to lock into that grab and continue at 23. I've never done these tricks. It's hard for me to weigh in on that. But based on percentages and what I've seen other riders do, that might lead to that being more difficult. But it's also tough when safety has been something that's always been generalized as the most simplistic grab done, and obviously there's different ways to grab safety, but and like Matej might be one that's doing safety in a really appealing way compared to most. It's safety, so it's hard to over reward that. Run one again, Miro comes down, does that 23 perfect, is landing like on reflection. Now watching after the fact, he lands like a little bit too on his feet, on his heels, and kind of washes a couple degrees, still riding out straight. Like I have no problem with this in reality. Just wanted to kind of point out something that we didn't really catch in real time and we saw after the fact. So then after that, it's set with Miro in first, Matej in second. I forget if it was Luca or T-Pod in third, fourth. You might have been right where Luca might have
was still fourth.
Might have been in fourth. So then T-Pod comes out, run two, tries the trip 23, explodes. Probably would have been the winning trick if he lands that trip 23, just because he went huge, which is why he exploded. That grab is really complicated, and a triple 23 versus a double 23, you just kind of have to err towards the risk that they're putting into that to go upside down that third time, that late in a spin, and reward for that in some capacity.
And I think in the same way as that, and when you talk in terms of risk, Dylan also tried to switch trip bio 21.
Yeah, when he kept crashing on that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like ultimately, like that's kind of the situation that Dylan was put in, is he like did the first switch trip and then started trying to take it to switch with another rotation. And like that probably would have been rewarded. That might still have not been enough to get him into that top four with what had been landed with everything. But that trick in and of itself,
so insane,
unbelievable. And because it's a switch trip 16 that he was trying to take to 18.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like if he does a different grab, if he doesn't hook the leg on that, it's a different story. So going back to it, T-Pod blows up on the 23. He's a non-issue. He's locked in fourth, but he went for it, which is really cool. Luca comes up, and like ultimately, we thought it was set at this point with those three riders left, with the 23 being done, the switch tail better 21. We didn't think that Luca had the trick in his bag to jump up at all. Trip 21, trailing blunt. Like honestly, if you watch that on replay, he has kind of a brief moment in the air on his last rotation where he's a bit lost and he like loses it and looks over his shoulder. If he doesn't have that lack of composure in that millisecond of that rotation, he wins flat out. Trip 21, trailing blunt, hardest trick that's ever been done, most risk, grabs so proper. I don't think we could have done anything other than reward him for that. He would have had to win the contest. Yeah. But that slight open in the middle of it made it to us clear that it could not go into first, bumping over Matej and turning into the second place trick of the day. And then Matej obviously just going for that switch fronting on his last one. He had done what he came to do. He was rewarded as he was, for better or worse. Like, again, that's the one that we receive the most criticism about, is Matej not winning. And like from a style perspective, you got me. That kid is so unreal right now with what he's able to do. But like from an objective standpoint and the way we approach this contest, I'm very validated in the way it ended up panning out at the end of the day.
And I think some people have a hard time with Matej not getting a certain result, because they know what he can do. They've seen his videos, they've seen his edits and Instagram clips where he shows instances where he gets the things perfect. The hard thing with him is that sometimes in his strategy, he does things that are so risky that there's more room for imperfections. And that's what, if you have an imperfection of sort, then judges notice it. But then he had a couple instances in the later half of the season, like in Stoneham, where when he puts those risky trick choices together, then he wins.
Yeah,
It's
when it all comes together, like those I mean, there's no way to look at them other than they're low probability tricks to land in sequence, you know. So then
Mhm.
specifically with a slope style, that's why he hasn't been winning slope styles left and right. It's because the runs that he's mapping out are they're not he's not shooting for fifth or sixth place. He's shooting for first or last pretty much
Mhm.
in these competitions.
And I think that that's why people love him. And it's hard as a fan of Mate, let's say, seeing him not getting results for many times in a row. But I think it shows his character, and I think it's cool. Like, he's not trying to game the system to have podiums, to have some financing. He just wants to do what he wants to do, and for better or for worse, we're there to witness it. And when you see it come together again in Stoneham, I say it because he won that one, and we both were there on the panel, so it's clear in my mind how insane that run was.
Oh yeah.
And I think it reminds me a bit of Henrik when it took him some years at the beginning to get dialed in comps, let's say. Not to say Mate is not dialed, but trying to, with every comparison not being perfect. And now I feel like he's getting into that zone where if he lands those low probability runs, like you said, you get into that A-Hall territory where um, I don't know what's your take, but I think my take on A-Hall is getting those low probability runs and turning it into high probability. You see a lot of tricks that he does in his run that make him win. Is they're difficult, they're progressive, they click all the criterias, but are in outside of those criterias, what we can say is they're fucking risky.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing too with it is like the low probability tricks are rarely on jumps. Like we're mainly talking about rails when we talk about the probability, and it's because
Mhm.
the like as watched through the competition, it's really hard to get some of those tricks, specifically when you're changing direction on the rails in calculated manners. It's really hard to do those predictably, and that's something that A-Hall I think has above everyone else is his confidence and approach to rails. Is he's got a strategy that he can compromise throughout the run, and as you're watching him, like it oftentimes kind of progresses throughout the competition where you think, okay, we saw that trick before. That's a pretty tough one for him to finish the rail. But as it stacks up, is that going to cut it for finals? Then you're looking at all that. And then in finals, he'll do the same trick, 80% of it, and then he'll lock at the end of the rail and do a pretzel four or continuing two in a place where he just came out to forward. And then you're looking at that and it's like, I don't know how many times a regular person would have to practice that to be able to land it, but his probability of landing those rail tricks is higher because of his ability. And when he can lace those together, he's a great example as to like slope style. When I started judging, it was about jumps. You're looking at like what jumps people are doing. The rails are all fairly comparable. There's nobody that's really doing anything vastly superior on the rails. And if they do, it was for the most part overlooked because
Mhm.
rail skiing hadn't really been looked at from the culture perspective as to what makes things difficult and not. It was contest skiing, and it really came down to jumps. A-Hall's someone that when he wins a contest, it's usually on the rails, and then the jumps are where they need to be for that run, but the rails are the thing that I'm having trouble comprehending weeks later.
When I think about, let's say you do that a lot on your podcast, the Mount Rushmores. Um, when I think about the greatest, I think a lot of talent, but also production. Like, oh, let's say someone is a good rail skier. Well, did they only do one segment or did they do 20? Like, that influences. Like, have you actually produced with that talent or have you just let it sleep? Um, and I think A Hall is adding another layer on that discussion. Let's say of best rail skier, the runs he's been putting together in the past 5 years is
Unbelievable.
insane. Because if you do a trick on a street part, it might have taken you 2 times. Like, it's a different type of perspective. It might have taken you 2 times, but it might have taken you 100 times. Maybe you went 3 days in a row to that rail, but there's still a lot of respect for getting that trick. What he's doing in those slope runs is it's game on. It's right now.
Yep, exactly.
And he fucking gets them. It's on. I think he's the best rail skier of all time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd argue with that. I think, especially like when you look at what he's doing, contest rails, rail jams, aside from slopestyle, what he does in rail jams, and then his street parts are just like, I mean, but like Colby is another person that I think takes a similar strategy through the rails, and he has, I mean, his X Games run this year was just doing, or maybe he did it in World Champs because he didn't do well in X Games with the alley-oop flat 5 onto the teardrop rail.
Yeah, in Aspen World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like these guys are doing tricks that just like it should be a park shoot trick. It should be something that took them a whole day to do. And then they do it 1 run, 2 run, 3 runs in a row. And it's just the level of consistency versus doing the same jump tricks every time. I kind of expect that of these skiers. The amount of airbag time they have, I expect them to land their jump tricks every time. But the rail tricks, there's a real chance that they won't. And this, like, to me, talking about consistency on rails, Alex Belmar, X Games, probably the last X Games that he competed in slopestyle, really would have been tough for him to compete with everybody on the jumps in this. But watching his rail run was just out of this world because there was a maybe 35-foot gap to a down rail, and he practice competition every single run of practice, every single run through the competition, 4 prets 4, every single run, didn't have a mistake at all. And like, to understand how hit or miss that trick is, that even on 1 out of 10 times I didn't see him land a little bit weird and do a continuing 2. The only time in the entire contest that I did not see him do a 4 prets 4 is when he locked in a little too good in practice and did 4 prets 6 on this 30-foot gap to down rail, the one right before the jumps. You have no room for speed. 4 prets 4 with almost 100% success rate. Those skiers that have that rail success rate, it really like it's something to behold because it is hard. It is really hard to not mess up on the rails. Jumps, you might miss a grab, you might mess up the takeoff, but it's a lot fewer variables to take into account than actually balancing on another material during your maneuver.
I think that's something that really stood out to me being on 2 World Cup panels this year and watching it more closely, I guess, with the judging eye is, as you said, people are insanely good at jumps. People are also insanely good at rails. Like, there are no easy runs these days. The ones who stand out, like Colby, you gave an example with the rodeo into the teardrop rail, or Ehal or Mate, is how far are you willing to take the risk and risk it with multiple features that are risky and trick choice that is risky and approach that are risky, one after one another, and actually linking them in World Cups. You have 2 runs.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point about Colby, I think it's a different subject because I was saying, Ehal being so good at rails. Colby, what impresses me so much is he's not out there practicing his rails, let's say, by filming street parts. He's sledding in the back and hitting a scooter. So that's a whole other beast that, again, respect to that also because it's fucking insane.
Yeah, both Colby and Ehal are skiers that I hold in such high regard just because of what they've accomplished outside of the competitive realm. Like, both have been dominant inside the contest circuit for years, but haven't got complacent in only doing that and have ventured out to prove just how dominant they are. And Colby, through his video parts, skiing like massive lines very fast, like for him to compete in natural selection tour and to actually have a chance, like I don't know how much of that you watched, but I watched it and was like, Colby's up there. Like, maybe these other guys are skiing really fast and have line selection in a way that somebody that is spending 50% of their time minimum in the park might not have the advantage there. He was up there. And then both them in their pursuits outside of contest skiing, I think is so impressive as to what they're doing. And just also proving how this sport, like more so than snowboarding, in my opinion, is there's no separation between the top end contest and top end film parts. They're a lot of times the same athletes. We do have those outliers, but I really, snowboarding has not had that many personalities that were that good at both. Could win a World Cup one year and then put out the street part of the year the same year, and that's that's really interesting in skiing. And I think also what makes more of the core interested in following the competitive side, because it is A-Hall, it is Colby, it's these people that they see in videos, in matchstick movies, TGR, in like A-Hall's own projects, in whatever they're doing, real ski. And then now they get to see that dude try his hand at slopestyle, and they're relevant, super relevant.
Mm-hmm. And also, to your point, bringing in tricks that would be sick to see in a street part in a slope run.
Oh yeah.
Like, let's say A-Hall did in the World Champ slope style this year. One of his rail features was doing, and tell me if I'm wrong, but doing a 270 on to a snow pad, sliding the snow pad, hopping onto a rail, and then doing a back four out. But that, if you take that all in, it's like a 2-on Pretz 4, but where he slid the snow to get on the feature. And that's something that screams video part in my mind. Like, I would think B-Dog, or I don't know, like the Bunch doing
I think
a
that was
one
teen right before World Champs that he did that.
Okay, maybe
specifically, but I mean, just the creativity too. And then you look at A-Hall, for example, like his World Championships run. One of his tricks was on the transfer rail, the first feature, where he didn't do a switch up, but just hopped backwards to the other rail. So a rotationless transfer to back four uphill. Like to the general person watching that compared to everyone else, they might not be that overwhelmed. Like you saw Jeremy Gagne in that same contest disaster the first part of the rail and just do a 6-on to the lower part. That probably stands out to the crowd a lot more, but then you understand, okay, so he hopped on stationary, back transferred with no rotation, just getting his tails over, and then locked in and got a spin. That's creative. And that's just something that's thinking outside the box and adding to that predictability, because those things are not predictable. And like when you're as good as some of these competitors are, maybe that stuff becomes a little bit more predictable and consistent, but the creative parts of course are never the ones that everyone's doing, and that's what really can be a highlight in slopestyle specifically.
A lot, as we said, rail skiing progressed. For a while it was do your 270 onto the rail and just go onto the jumps, because who the fuck cares about rails? It got to a point where people were doing crazy tricks, and these days, man, we are in a golden era of wow, it's insane.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch. And from a longtime ski nerd, it like sometimes you just have to sit back and reflect on these contests as just, what the hell did I just watch? Like where is this sport, and how did it get here? Because it's way beyond where I thought it ever could get as a competitor back when I was 18, 19, and as a judge when I got into it 11, 12 years ago. The sport has made leaps and bounds, and it's fun to be a part of.
I think this leads us naturally. I think it fits. What the fuck is happening with pipe skiing? Like, to put people in context, just what I'm thinking right now. Sometimes people watch less the World Cups than other events because streaming is not easy to get, or there may be reasons. I was on a panel with you in Aspen. The way it's judged for pipe, you require less judges. So I was judging slow, but I was not judging pipe. So that day I'm off. So I don't talk to you, you do your shit. And I'm just at the bottom of the pipe watching it as a spectator. So I don't have my judging brain on. I'm just watching it. I'm having fun. I'm talking with people. But I talked to you guys after. You said it was the best pipe comp ever up to that date. And I remember asking you questions for fun on, why was that one fourth instead of fifth? Because again, I didn't have my judge brain on. But I just remember being at the bottom, like, I'm glad I didn't judge it, because what the fuck is happening? Like, the level is so good.
Yeah, pipe is unbelievable right now. Super exciting. And this is something that, Pete and I have ended up bringing up so much on the Good Enough podcast, just in how pipe, I mean, I never would have guessed that pipe would be the one that I'm like at the edge of my seat watching where it's going. But I mean, that Aspen contest specifically, best qualifier to World Cup that's ever happened in my memory, period. And then the final, highest level final I've ever seen, just from a basis of the best runs being done to that time, as well as the most amount of high quality runs being landed. Pretty much everyone landed a run. And a lot of that I think was to do with the weather and the pipe, like because we
Mm.
don't always. That's a variable that it's hard to like not take into account. Is oftentimes we're not dealing with the perfect environment for these contests. So you might see a result, but the runs might not be what people are really capable of. So Aspen was one of the first times in a while where it's a daytime pipe. It's a little bit slushy. The weather's gorgeous, and all the right people are there to make it really interesting. And that contest just went off. The runs that we're seeing are remarkable, and I won't give Nick Gepper too much credit because there was a pipe scene that happened before him, but I will say that Nick Gepper getting involved in the pipe scene has elevated the standard as to which we look at grabs specifically in the half pipe world, and I think it's long past its due that we evaluate grabs in that way, specifically for the men, because they're putting together all the other pieces. Why were the grabs the thing that we really weren't as harsh on as we are in slopestyle skiers?
Yeah. And it doesn't, I don't know if he lit the fire all by himself, but there's definitely a fire that's lit right now. And there's a conjunction with when he got into it.
Yeah. And again, like how much credit you can give Nick, I give him credit.
Yeah.
But maybe we're selling the rest of the field short. Like again, there have been people who have been staples of this since its inception in the Olympics, like David Wise, for example, who's won the first Olympics in this and is very likely still going to be competing for his fourth medal at this, ending on the podium in all of them. All of these skiers have pushed the sport so much, but maybe it is just that timing wise, when Nick got in this, there's a fire in all of these competitors. The sport is so fun to watch. There's so much variation in their approaches. And now the tricks are starting to get consistent enough that we're seeing them with amplitude and combinations that I just didn't think was possible. And I also see this lining up with the introduction of these new private events. The writing's been on the wall for a while since the announcement of X Games League and Snow League that there was going to be a privatized tour that was separate from the World Cup circuit that might compensate these riders in a way that they're not used to through the World Cup scene. And they got excited. It made them want to still be relevant in a couple years when this comes around. And now we're hitting that cycle. 2020, I guess the end of 2025 will be our first Snow League competition for skiing. If they keep the same prize money, that's 50 grand for first place. That's huge for any one of these competitors. Then when you match it with whatever they're sponsor matching, I don't know what type of personal agreements these guys have. This is life-changing money for these skiers. And not even as much as money, but it's recognition for a sport that a lot of us had long since thought dead. You know, I watched this sport stagnate to a point where it's only a few nations participating. How many half pipes in the world do we really have? But what I'm hoping is that this new energy and the characters that are coming out of it being a huge part of it could revamp the transition side of this sport in a way that maybe we don't have to travel across the world to go be a half pipe competitor. And we do have more transition skiing available across the globe because, I mean, again, going back to the sheer numbers of it, how many 22-foot pipes are there in the world? Less than 10 for sure. Might vary year to year, but there's not a lot. So that just means the opportunity to get into it is it's hindered based on proximity. You really only can be a half pipe skier if you have the finances to be able to go travel to that half pipe, or if you just happen to be lucky and live at that half pipe. But now training camps and everything have made that expensive. So now these public half pipes might just be private half pipes that you can only access if you pay to play. So the sport has gotten so, like, I guess, opposite of where it started in just being, again, to talk about Nick Gepper, he said it was the most pure form of action sports. This is the only spectator sport that we have where you can put people at the bottom and they can see top to bottom the entire run and have an opinion, because there's no way to say that somebody that went bigger than someone else didn't make that ground presence of fans feel different than somebody that went smaller. So I just think it's really cool to see a resurgence in halfpipe. I'm excited to see where it goes. And we're going into this Olympic year without a clear favorite in my mind. Like, we went into the last one and I think all eyes were on Nico to win, and then he won. David was still a relevant threat. He's on the podium. Ferreira had been starting to pick back up, and then the last 4 years have been where he's been ultra dominant, but it was a bit predictable. Right now, we have a very exciting time at the top where you've got Ferreira, Gepper, Hunter Hess, Finley Melville Ives, Luke Harold, David Wise still in the mix, John Salonen coming back from injury. You've got Brendan McKay, who's like world champion of 2023. You've got, and then I just feel like I'm doing people a disservice. Burke Irving bringing completely different rotations to the half pipe than anyone else is. You got young and up and comers like Matt Labaugh, who came and stunned us in Aspen with that third place finish and announced to the world that he's there and ready for this competition. I am so excited about where half pipe's going for the men, and then to look back and to not speak on the women would be to doing them a disservice. This world championships for women, minus Eileen, which is a huge loss in that field. Eileen has been setting the tone for that field. It was such a good competition, and the combinations that these women are putting together, the grab selection, the run, just composition top to bottom, linking switch spins, having good maintained amplitude. It's all moving in a positive direction, and I hope that it trickles down to the development of the sport and we start seeing more interest from a young age of people that want to get into transition skiing specifically.
Yeah, you said a bunch of things that I completely agree with. Like, my main thing with pipe is it's not accessible. So how are you going to build a pool of talent if it's so, rare to have a good pipe? Then also it's not inviting. Like, if you eat shit in the pipe, either you deck or you fall down, you get wrecked. And then seeing that, there is actually new blood in pipe with Finn Melville and with Luke Harold and a bunch of others. And you see like Luke Harold doing a switch triple in the pipe as if it's nothing. You're like, okay, damn, I guess pipe is in good hands.
And it's people like that too that just it ends up blowing barriers away.
Yeah, exactly.
You never think about a triple. Now we're thinking about triples. It's going to happen.
It seems as if there was a barrier of progression. We've seen it broken many times in bigger and in slope. Let's say there were barriers at the dub 10 in bigger, and then at the dub 14.
Doubles at first, I remember thinking when I saw PK doing the first dub 10s and dub 12s, it was like, wait, what? How is it not flippy? But yeah, it breaks barriers consistently. And half pipe right now, I just think is at a stage where so many different people are taking off personal barriers. You got Ferreira. He's been doing that dub 16, but he's been doing it with a grab that we can hate on. He's grabbing Cindy in that. It's not a very desirable grab. What does he do? He learns it with lead blunt, and he caps the hell out of that lead blunt. That increases the value and the difficulty and the progression of that trick a ton. You look at Gepper and the way that he's approaching this with his now switch alley-oop bio Misty 9 that he's doing in the pipe that had been previously unheard of or unthought of, but kind of the door was opened to that trick by the bone roll, which Justin Dory started, then Noah Bowman made popular. So I just see it's progressing at a rate in which I'm really excited. Known entity wise, you might be able to make a guess as to what you might expect at the Olympics, but I would say not all the cards are on the table going into this year. Whereas in slopestyle, maybe they are for the most part. I mean, we're probably going to see a slopestyle run that's 16, 18, 18, 16, 18, 19, maybe 18, 18, 19. We're going to see some wild stuff happening at the Olympics, but that's within a degree of difficulty. We've seen runs that are similar to that capacity in the past, minus a 180 or 360. Mm-hmm. Half pipe is Hunter Hess doing that Misty 5, now turning it to 7. Young up-and-comers like Ben Fethke doing the bone roll, but to double. Not quite grabbing it consistently, which has been kind of a hindrance on him being rewarded in these contests, but so many different avenues of progression happening at the same time, and I'm just excited for the show. It's really fun to watch right now.
That's another topic we might get into before we get onto 8 hours with this podcast, but
right.
Last time I talked to you, we talked a lot about the Olympics, how it was in China, that you were trick calling. This time you will be head judge. So you're the big boss this time. And just before we get into that, I just had another thing that popped into my mind. Did you see that Gus wants to do a comeback?
Yeah, no, we actually amongst a couple of the judge boys and myself were joking that now it's on Joss. Joss has to come back so we can see the 2014 slope panel or slope podium in halfpipe 2026. But yeah, Gus tried for China, and I think was kind of hampered by a lot of factors going into the COVID Olympics. But I saw a run he put out the other day from Mammoth. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah,
but he just didn't do well.
Yeah,
but he's skiing well right now in the Mammoth pipe, and he'll be a threat. But I will say the level is markedly higher than it was the last time he made an attempt. I would never write him out. Like, Gus is a competitor in a similar way to Gepper being a competitor, where if he wants something, he's going to put it all on the line to try to get there.
I feel like he's always been someone who was one of the best in the field, whether it was when he was doing slow, big air, or pipe. He just had a thing where he maybe wasn't the most clutch in the field. So that's always been something hard for me to like assess him. Like, let's say we have to bet between friends. Oh, who you think's going to do well? It's hard because I know if Gus gets it, he wins.
Yeah, but will he get it? Yeah, it'd be the thing. And I mean, the instances in which he's laid it down, you look at the Olympics where he got second place, and then there was a World Cup, I believe it was, in Park City, where Gus laid down what was like probably still could be looked at as one of the best half pipe runs of all time. Was an outlier. You know, he didn't continue that year to just do that run everywhere and win, as we see with a lot of pipe skiers. A lot of pipe skiers and slope skiers, you see them break that barrier and never go back. And Gus was somebody that it was kind of that he was always putting all his chips on the table, and the run was always maybe a little bit like not even more difficult than other people are trying in hopes of being rewarded in that way, but difficult in a way that made it that much less predictable. My thought in this is the dub 14s. You have not seen many people try to replicate doing both double 14s because that rotation is difficult. You land switch. It's a lot of rotation to then control a switch landing and then continue in the pipe. If you're doing two of them, that means that one of them is not your last hit in the pipe. So that trick in and of itself, I think, stands to be rewarded because of the minimal amount of people that you see trying it, specifically so when you see people doing it left and right, which is something that Gus, I'm guessing that will be his approach because that was where his strengths were laying prior to this last Olympic cycle.
So to get into the Olympics, you'll be head judging. It's this upcoming season in Italy.
Yep. Yeah. It's
Are you hyped? Are you hyped or scared?
I'm excited. Like there's a position that I wanted to be in. Ultimately, the reason that I got into judging from the beginning is I wanted those high pressure decisions to come down to somebody that I felt cared as much as I did about the sport. And now 12, 13 years later, after getting judging, I find myself in the position to be able to evaluate the sport at its peak, you know, at maybe not the peak athletics wise, because you never know how the Olympics is going to turn out, but visibility wise, the event that everyone is going to see. And it's a lot of responsibility because I look at the past three Olympics and I feel so happy with the way our sport was portrayed to the mass public. And I think the judges all did a very good job in all of those. And I would hate to be in charge of the panel that is the change in that. You know, I mean, we'd be ignoring an elephant in the room to not talk about snowboarding at the last Olympics and how much of a hellfire they got about missing that one grab. But in reality, they did pretty well. They did miss one grab, and that one grab ended up being gold. And that one grab is the thing that's still probably going to be talked about in 20 years as to that Olympics being the oddity because the person that missed the grab won the Olympics.
And I think you're making a great point there. Again, not to tangent off, but about how hard judging is. Because on a slope run, you may have a 6, 7, 8, but let's say 6 tricks done by X amount of rider. You multiply them. There's so many things, and you just have to get one wrong at one time.
To
potentially fuck something up. So it's
it's a lot of pressure to be perfect all the time, and that's just something that you can't ask of a human being to be perfect 100% of the time. But it is like I will say for sure it's a pressure, but it's something that I am excited to embrace that pressure, not only for myself and for the future judges and the judges that I've been working with being at this level and ready and confident going into this contest, but also to try to represent this sport that's meant so much to my life and the like second half of my life as I'm as whenever I got involved in it now, to be able to continue to be a part of it and to help try to continue that sport progressing and being in the limelight of the general public. I'm really excited about. But for sure, like the last Olympics, I was trick caller, which was kind of the ideal position, like I was hanging with the judges. I'm with my friends. I'm just making sure that I'm on point as to saying what everything is for the official transcript of the results. So they are passing that along. But in reality, like I didn't have a score put down on TV that had my name associated with it. And that's going to be the major difference in this one. And in all reality, it's just another competition, but it is a competition that because of the viewership, because of the amount of people that care about it, and because of the way the Olympic cycle works, I've been trying to take very seriously and with a lot of responsibility, just understanding what I hope to bring to the table, because I think all the judges that have done their time prior to me did a very good job, and I just don't want to be the one that lets it slip,
And as you said many times on your podcast, for better or for worse, how things are structured now, this is what everything is leading up to. Some people take a year off from competing because they know they want to heal up their body for this. Some people are hiding tricks or not, they want to keep him fresh and new for this. Like the financing, the national teams, how the coaches see things, it is all with the grand finale that is the Olympics.
Exactly. And it's like maybe an artificial finish line that gets placed within the sport, because like what people don't see is after the Olympics next year, Olympics concludes in February. There's 3 more slope styles and another big air and another half pipe in the FIS calendar after that. There's also 2 snow league half pipe contests that are going to happen after that. So it's a finish line, as in like people set these 4-year cycles to understand when they need to apex. But in reality, life just keeps going. And that's the crazy thing about it. And I think a lot for these athletes to understand life beyond this deadline, like whether they make the Olympics, whether they win, whether they lose, it's all cyclical and will repeat again, whether they're done or continuing in the sport. It just kind of keeps coming back. And what it really has done is it just creates emphasis on this contest, mainly in the visibility aspect, that you just know this is the one time that my grandma is probably going to tune in to a Freeski contest because it's on TV. Hey, there's 4 Americans in this. From what I've been hearing on the news, 2 of them are a threat to get gold. Yeah, she's going to watch this. She's also watching curling, ice dancing, Nordic combined. Like there's so many events, and people have like increased nationality and like national pride at these moments. They're there rooting for someone. They don't have all the pieces. They don't understand our sport. It's our job to show them the sport in the most authentic form. And as a judge, I feel we have added pressure to make that result feel as authentic as physically possible in order to give people the best understanding of what our sport's about, and maybe, just maybe, get more viewers that follow after the Olympics and don't just turn that TV off, never to think of it again, thinking about how exciting and incomprehensible that sport was in the hour that they watched it, and then just go on to watching ice dancing and then have an opinion about that. Like, we're hoping through this big expenditure of energy in the cycle that it brings more viewership and raises all boats. And because I want these athletes to all be superstars on a level that they're household names, and we don't have much of that in this sport. The Olympics can create that, and it's our job to build this up to a point where it can be sustained after that.
Well said. Do you want to put people maybe in perspective a bit about the preparation that goes on for you before that event, in terms that just to give you some not hell, but what I mean, you already have your panel set out. I think you have kind of a clear schedule of doing some events in the season prior to get ready with that panel. So, what goes in, you're not just being shipped to Italy on a random day and being like, hey, judge that event, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another misconception about the sport, is people just saying like, where'd they find these guys? Like, how does that guy that I'm seeing his name on TV for the first time on an Olympic panel right before the start of an event, what did he do to justify his spot there? But that's the one thing I can assure everybody is there is a time-tested process to be able to get people equipped to deal with a sport with as much visibility as this. And like, ultimately, again, every event gets brought into with a lot of scrutiny and ability. Like, we want to do the right thing at every event, but this one specifically with the eyes on it, you want to make sure that everything's going to go smoothly. So these panels for World Championships and for the Olympics are selected many years in advance. I believe I was informed that I would be the head judge for 2026 about 2.5 years ago. So about 2.5 years ago, when the panel was selected and notified that we would be the people representing our countries and representing freeskiing at the Olympics as judges, it kind of sets the tone within that group. And then that group of Olympic judges kind of gets an increased workload for the years leading up to it. For example, last year, just throughout the contest, each of the judges that's judging the Olympics in 2026 probably was on 30 to 50% more competitions than somebody that wouldn't be. Hence, like with you getting involved in the World Cup circuit, the years leading up to the Olympics, there's less opportunity for people that are not already named on that Olympic panel. So we try years in advance to give everyone adequate preparation, to give us opportunities to judge with each other and to be put in situations where we're together working and talking about the progression of the sport together as a group in a cohesive way throughout the years, just making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page. Then leading into the Olympic year, we're doing like first and foremost, as in addition to being the judges coordinator, which is the role I now fill within FIS, I'm the education coordinator for freeskiing. So in addition to the clinics that we're hosting all over the world this year in US, Canada, 2 in Europe. We'll see if we have stops in Asia. But so we do those clinics. Then we'll also do another elite clinic, which is a clinic that we host for the athletes and coaches so that we can get at one time in a controlled setting as much feedback as to our process, giving them knowledge about our process and taking criticism from them about our process, as well as how we view individual tricks compared to what the group majority might actually say. So that's kind of a preseason thing where we're trying to have this more athlete forum where we get a bit more room for feedback to help guide and base our decisions off. But then once the season starts, it's going to be a very tight and condensed calendar. And all of the judges that are going to be represented on the Olympics will be on a heavy workload, likely doing 5 to 6 events prior to February, which for anyone that's like worked World Cups, like generally as a US judge with many other judges that I'm in direct competition with for assignments, it wouldn't be surprising for me to get 2 or 3 World Cups in the beginning years. Now, this year, some of these judges will be doing 6 prior to February, which again is not the end of the season. So, and then to add another layer onto that, there will be specific competitions this year where we will assign the judges so that it is the full Olympic panel working together at that event prior to the Olympics. And our goal is 3 events where we can get the entire Olympic panel that will be evaluating those sports together to practice and to have those conversations. We'll have continued text threads, obviously, just to kind of discuss preparations and everything. But ultimately, a lot of energy and work goes into this contest in a way that isn't physically possible at every event, to be able to have this cohesive nature leading up to it for years into it. But all of the judges selected for these events specifically have contributed so much to the judging of the sports and are really in a position where I feel very confident and comfortable with the group going in, that we have the strongest imaginable portion or panel of high quality judges from all over the world.
And I think that's a really great thing that you said about having the judges together for events to practice. Is that new? Or that's something that's already been done in the past?
It's already been done, but this is the first time where we've really started to do it in kind of an official way, where we're publicly broadcasting it, not only to the higher ups that are allowing for me to fly all of these judges to preseason contests in Dubai, but to the competitor base, because we've gotten a lot of feedback that they just want consistency. And leaning back to our first conversation of consistency and predictability, that's something that the athletes want to know as well. And they want to understand, for better or worse, that they can sit in one contest and see how it was judged and know that those are the exact same judges that are going to be at this very pivotal, high profile event in a couple weeks. We can assume that it's going to go in a similar manner to that contest that happened previously. So just give the athletes as much of a preparation period as possible with that.
To get back on the process of judging, maybe to enlighten people, to go back to my first point at the beginning of how clueless I was, and we kind of skipped over it. You passed me the ball, but I didn't grab it earlier. I think would be good to get into like how we prepare to judge an event, and we have a good example because I was on one of your panels this year in Aspen, and how much thought goes into judging. Where let's say you get into Aspen, you're a head judge. You have an SBS panel, which means there are 6 features on the course. There are teams of 2 that judge 2 features individually. So 2 people judge the top 2 features, 2 people judge the middle 2 feature, 2 people judge the bottom 2 features, and then there are 3 judges that are the composition judges that judge the whole run. And then you are a head judge being the maestro of it all. So then you get your panel, you get to the course, and you got to decide, okay, who gets on what?
Exactly.
How does your brain go about that?
Yeah, that's kind of like a unspoken nuance to this whole thing as a head judge, but even just aligning the panel. But looking at that too, it's kind of a mixture of experience and expertise as I perceive it. Like you, for example, being one of your first World Cup. Was that your first World Cup?
Yeah, it was my first.
Was Aspen?
Yeah.
I guess I forgot which happened first, Stoneham or Aspen, but then you were just trick calling for Stoneham.
Yeah. The easy job.
Yeah, you had the cool job at that one. But yeah, it's kind of like so I, as the education coordinator and judges coordinator, I have hands-on experience with all the judges on a World Cup level. When selecting judges for like individual sections and composition, it's based on my understanding of that judge as I know them to that point. What level of experience do they have? What type of skiing do they seem more interested in? How did they do at the clinic? How did they do on these contests that I've judged previously with them? What's their English level? Like how, on a scale from 1 to 10, how proficient are they and comfortable with English? And then trying to kind of create pairs, especially so with the sections, as to, okay, this person, this might be their first World Cup, which might not mean that they're an inexperienced judge, but they might be inexperienced with the SBS system. So you want to pair them with someone with more experience. A lot of the judges that we're getting involved on the younger side right now are very rail heavy in their ski experience. So it's cool to be able to have Tucker Fitzsimons, a Dane Kirk, Jonas Fjellstedt on a rail portion of the course because they understand rails in a way that we might not previously. So they might be predetermined to end up on a rail section as well. Like, again, something that I would see you probably fitting that as well, just with your experience in the streets and filming streets and just your closest to rail skiing, more than anything. But so kind of taking those factors into account, experience, our kind of comfortability with them, and just trying to balance the panel out so that it can be as effective as possible from all standpoints. Because ultimately, as a head judge in these situations, I don't get to put a number down to voice whether I agree or disagree with something. All I can do is give everyone the equipment to prepare, and then trust in my judges and their ability to be able to sequentially work through these runs and come up with a ranking that they stand by based on everything that was discussed prior to the competition.
Like, and again, having judged with you, you will align us again as a maestro in the metaphor or the comparison with an orchestra, where we'll talk and say something or be about to put a score, and you'll say like, really, you think that grab was well done, let's say, and just like put an inception in our brain to say, okay, but then you won't say like, hey, you guys are wrong, you should score it otherwise. Like, that's not your role, and you don't have time for that either way, because there's 4 different teams, like 3 different section team, and then the composition. So then you can do that. So You're just like trying to lead us on the righteous path.
Yeah, and like as a head judge too, like you're right, you don't have time to get into the details of every single thing, but I do have oversight that I can bring up and just kind of, okay, like even just checks and balances. Like what I feel like I'm doing more often is, so I guess just to add further foresight into how we do this. But so then the section judges, once you find out that you're on section one and two together with a partner, you understand you're judging rails. Those two judges will spend the entire contest during practice just watching those rails, trying to understand all the possibilities that they might see, to then come up with the range as to how they will distribute the scores to be able to throw into that mathematical equation at the end of it and spit out a result. But yeah, so then like for me, I guess as a head judge, my job is just to continue those conversations with that small group to bring out more things than they might have already been talking about before the contest. So, okay, this stacks up against this. Well, how come? Okay, so you see that as being harder. Okay, I accept that. Well, what about this compared to that? And then kind of making those decision trees a little bit done for you. But then after you've had those individual conversations, so maybe I'm having a conversation with panel 1, judge 1 and 2, panel 2, 3 and 4, panel 3, 5 and 6, and the composition ones, 4 separate discussions. Then it's about bringing those together.
And when I was in Aspen, we get there, we get 2 days of judging. Not of judging, sorry. We get 2 days to watch practice, to get ready. Then I think one of those days we watched the whole course just to understand how everything's flowing. And then as a section judge, maybe on the second day, I went and just watched that I was judging the third rail and the first jump. So just watching those 2 features, taking notes and discussing it with my judging partner. And I'm only watching that at that point. Then it's a lot of taking notes on what the tricks have been done on what feature, what is creative, what is not, what is hard, what is not. And we're going through it through and through all night, discussing it, preparing it so that when the day of the comp comes, not that we know what's coming, but we're as prepared as can be. Whereas sometimes as a viewer, you're on the other side of it where you haven't seen practice, you don't know what's coming. So it's like 2 totally different perspectives.
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation that really goes into SBS just to make sure that everything's aligned. Like not only within that section that you've kind of created a understandable matrix, if you will, as to how each trick will score in that section, but how that relates to every other section on the course. And then like from a head judge perspective, I'm just trying to help guide the discussions to come up with those evaluations and then facilitate the discussion between each one of the groups beforehand, because this can't happen during the contest because then it's just slowing everything down. But then to also just, kind of as you're saying, add little feedback points. Like, okay, so that trick that we just saw, that compares to this one we saw. What was the score for that? Okay, so this is similar to that, above that, below that, kind of in that same range. But it's just kind of, trying to add oversight in a way that doesn't get collected just with each judge working as an independent panel, because that's the big thing too. Between SBS and OI, SBS, you have groups that are working together as part of a larger team, whereas OI, the entire group is that team and everyone has a voice for all of it. There are a lot more variables to take into account with OI because you're looking at an entire run in a way that has a lot more subjective nature than can really be evaluated with the level of tricks happening right now in any predictable manner throughout the entire competition. But SBS like kind of breaks everyone apart in a way that the communication is not as fluid from every single person. So the conversations need to be guided and like decisions almost need to be snap decisions happening based on studying pretty much that you did prior to the contest.
So all that to say, a lot of work that goes into it beforehand.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, all these contests too, like the level of the sport that we're dealing with right now is just so high that there's no judge that's walking into it unprepared. Even more so, some of the first-time judges are the ones that I feel are the best prepared. You and Zach Monroe, I think, are a really good example of this because of how excited you even are to be put in a position to be able to evaluate the sport at that level. You're doing way more due diligence than the average judge that's actually like consistently on these contests, because we have contest experience that we're riding on and trying to rely on a little bit. But you guys coming in a little bit green are the most excited. And that's kind of how I felt when I started judging. Was I was just like, man, like I'm built for this. I get to judge this now. And then it kind of came in like, okay, I'm arguing with somebody right now that's on my panel as to what I see right versus wrong. And I don't feel like they did the same preparation as me or like had the same understanding as me. And then ultimately understanding that a panel is only as strong as the group can be, and you kind of have to like if you don't work together, if you create instances of misunderstanding or tension within that panel, it can affect the result, and that's totally opposite to the point.
Yeah. I think something that I didn't think of, and again, it's normal because I didn't have a clue what was happening, is how, yeah, it's important to be knowledgeable about the sport, but it's also super important to be a good communicator. And that's where I guess the head judge job goes in, to make sure everyone understands each other, because you are not, each judge is not alone with his thoughts giving a score. It's all a group discussion where everyone kind of tries to push for what they saw or what they valued or what, stood out to them, and everyone kind of having, not to agree, but, debate to trying to find where, because we're all comparing and contrasting, right? Oh, was that run better than that one? Was it worse than that one? So it's, everyone is like trying to agree or find the right answers with everyone, and it has to be done inside of a minute, inside of 30 seconds, depending on the comps. So it's a big teamwork of listening to each other, talking to each other, and you know being open-minded.
Yeah, it's like a lot of like ability to process information quickly and to work well as a team, because you can be the most knowledgeable judge there, but if you're not willing to work and cooperate as a team, you're not valuable as a judge, and that's kind of one thing too, is being stubborn never helps anyone in these scenarios. You might your best interest as a judge in trying to get a result that it aligns with your viewpoint on it is to be the best at explaining it to everyone else. That's something that I really try to understand, is like you're judging in real time and you disagree with the person next to you. You two might be the most outspoken members on that panel. You two might single-handedly be influencing the result the most because you're the two most outspoken. And if you disagree, that conversation can go in many different ways, but it can either be contentious, in which you refuse to cede to each other's points and then nothing can be accomplished, or you almost treat it as a mini court situation with lawyers arguing against one another, where you have a couple seconds to make your point, speak to the things that you thought you saw that validate that being above or below something else, and then give them an opportunity to speak, and then you let it ride. Ultimately, if everyone calm-headedly is able to express their opinion in an understandable way that aligns with the criteria, and then everyone's not able to decide, that's a different story. But first and foremost, there has to be that discussion where everybody is willing to try to see it from the other perspective before moving on.
I have many points that I wanted to discuss with you about, things I noticed. I guess we can go like rapid fire, just have your small thoughts on it, because if not, we'll end up with a 5-hour podcast. But first thing is, we often say it's a judge sport, but what I noticed the most is, as I've stated before, but errors can happen. And
oh yeah,
I used to be judgmental of seeing like if maybe something that I saw, I would consider it like poor, like an error. But now I'm like, having seen it on the flip side, it's like, well, if there was one error, it means that on our test score, we got 99.9%. But
exactly. That's a pretty acceptable result for the most part. But
yeah,
I mean, I guess the one thing I will say about errors is errors happen. The place you don't want them to happen is in the podium.
Yeah.
And ultimately, again, like I'll continue to emphasize, everyone that's judging is a human, and humans are not perfect all the time. 99% success rate. And like when you're looking at it, if you're judging an OI slopestyle competition and there's however many competitors with however many number of features, with however many runs, how many different tricks, each intricate aspect of each trick, breaking it down by each criteria, there's per run, there's probably 50 different opportunities to mess up. So then when you're doing 100 runs in a day and you've gotten 5,000 elements correct, but you mess up on one, that's a pretty good success rate. You just hope, and hope and pray that it's not on the podium. You just hope that it's not an issue with the top 3 runs. And ultimately, yeah, mistakes happen. We're doing our best to be perfect. No one's perfect. But yeah, they happen, but you just try to make sure they don't happen on the podium. That's where as we've seen from snowboarding, that's where you get a lot of heat, is when it happens on the podium.
Another thing is, again, to lead back into that and not to play us as victims, but athletes have it rough. It may be windy, snowing, whatever they may be hurt. They have physical harm potential. But man, judges have it rough also. Like when you're on the World Cup, it's a different scenario because then you're treated differently because it's televised. So you're in a like television setup. But on lower levels, even in ORAMs, you don't
You're
have
outside.
you don't have the TV setup. You don't have replays. You are out there in the cold and wind and whatever else is coming at you. You are sitting there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It is because it's always easy again watching it from your couch at home to be like, oh, how did they judge that? Having done those lower level events and many of them, it's another thing. Like imagine taking a college exam, but instead of being in your classroom, you're outside in the wind, being snowed on, being cold
Exactly.
for
I
6
mean,
hours.
that is the toughest thing. Like there are so many variables that go into it, and just like that's another thing that I'm like really excited about all the people that want to get into judging, because like with the exception of every so often when somebody just assumes they're going to get into judging and start at the top, like they think they're going to judge their first contest and it's going to be X Games or something. And that's happened. We've had athlete judges and everything, but for the most part, anyone coming to a judge's clinic or showing up to judge an event understands that they're put in a position that nobody wants to be in. They're put in a position in which they have to tell a lot of people that what they did was not the best that day. And ultimately, one person is going to be truly happy with you. That's the winner. And that's the person that you evaluated as having nothing wrong or the least wrong with their run, and they get rewarded for it. But ultimately, you're creating a lot of people that might have distaste in your opinion. So that's already a tough position to put yourself into. But then you look at the entry level to judging and what you're really putting up with: outdoors, long hours, really cold temperatures, and then at the end of the day, getting
Shitty pay.
scrutinized. Yeah, payment not great in anyone's standard.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, you've busted your butt out there. You're outside all day. You're freezing. You did your job, and then on top of that, cherry on top, you get yelled at by coaches because they think you did something wrong. So it's a position that is really um, I'm always excited when I find somebody that wants to get into that, understands what it means, and then is still interested in getting into it, rather than thinking of just this blue sky scenario in which you're inside, everyone agrees with what you're saying, you're the only one judging, you don't have to work with a team, what you say goes,
Mhm.
which people might think it is, but in reality, that's not it. So I'm really I understand the plight of an average day-to-day judge, and I'm excited when anyone hits me up and is interested in getting involved and does not have a problem with starting in on the ground floor and getting into regional events, then national, then international, and working their way up.
I'm so grateful for you for having given that opportunity or opening that window because it's so crazy to, as someone who's been into free skiing for so long, to see in that limelight. Like in the past 3 seasons, I've done every. I don't know how it declines in different countries, but basically in Canada, from World Cups to the lower level events, there's like 5 levels, and
Yeah,
I've judged them all. So it's like a really great view of okay, where the sport is at. Going from the lower level events where we're judging kids in a baby park doing a 360 to 360, to being in Stoneham where you have some people doing switch 18 to switch 18.
yeah. I mean, it's really. I'm glad that you were interested in it. I feel like I felt in the middle of our first discussion, whether or not you were entertaining the thought at first, it was like, oh, I think he would actually be good at judging. Like if you got into it. So I'm really glad that I convinced you to come out to a clinic. I'm really glad that you stuck it out and gave chance at some of those contests that I know are not the most enjoyable to be at.
Mm.
And it's definitely rewarding when you get to see it come full circle and like give you your first World Cup nomination last year and get to bring you to Aspen to come and see the larger picture for a week. But yeah, it's definitely it's not for everyone. But the one thing that I've constantly reiterated is if people have criticisms about the judging, they're likely the people you want judging, the ones that have critical details that might have been overlooked, possibly were discussed, but that they want to bring to the table, and they have an issue with how a result came out because they saw something differently. Those are the people that we want in the booth. And if you're that hard-headed and opinionated to have those opinions, you could be a judge. And not a lot of it's a path not traveled by nearly as many as the sport. In reality, with all the opportunity coming up, we're going to need more judges, and we're going to need more people to throw themselves into that base level to then prove themselves throughout the years. So yeah, it's cool to see.
Yeah, I had a note that the whole process of going to a con, being a panel and judging, despite, being a bit like a referee in sports where you're not someone who's loved in any way or that gets praises. If you get praises, it's kind of weird because you're like, oh shit, are you not mad at me?
Yep.
It reminds me a lot of filming for projects where you're going in the streets, let's say, because that's my thing, with a crew filming. You don't know, is it gonna end in a great way or a poor way? Is it gonna be harsh? All the things of like going on a mission as a team, despite all the things that can go against you. Whereas, for lower level events, you're going in there like, we'll probably have a shitty judging setup. It'll probably be hard. We'll probably be cold, but hey, let's make it fun and let's try and, get the most out of it in a way.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's part of it, is just like understanding that at the end of the day, like we're never there to be in the spotlight either. Ultimately, I'd say referees is a pretty good comparison. And you might look at the contest or at a basketball game and be happy about the result, but ultimately the referees are always the person that both sides thought there were mistakes about. So just happens to be that our sport's a bit more difficult to understand than many of the traditional sports, but there'll always be disagreements, and we're always going to be in a tough position, especially so when you're outside and you know that you're going to get yourself into sitting in a tent without walls with no heat in a snowstorm on the side of a rail all day while you watch 100 riders take 2 runs each. But it's like that level of dedication, that there are people that are willing to sit through that really makes our sport unique. Because I mean, we just have a lot of people that are very dedicated to seeing this sport succeed, and to see these skiers that we understand to be working hard in this contest environment be evaluated in a fair way that's true to their performance.
I had a series of thoughts that I wanted your opinions on the business side of skiing. As people know or should know about you, you are also involved heavily outside of judging with surface skis, with joystick, and with Causwell. I wanted to talk a lot about it, but now we're at over 2 hours, so we'll try to do it quick. But I really want some of your thoughts, because I think it's really a good moment for that. Surface skis has been alive for a while. You got involved with it, kind of giving it a second life in the past over 5 years.
Yeah,
6,
5,
7.
6.
Yeah. It's in a great position nowadays, and I'm just curious how it's going. What's your vibe since the last time we talked? Because it seems like the brand is getting more and more recognized, bigger and bigger, with more athletes, with more projects cooking. But I'm also curious to have the business touch on it, because you guys have a president on your side that loves tariffs. And I think there's been a lot of evolution or talk in the past years since COVID, let's say, about how the snow sport industry is going. And I think the new big discussion these days is tariffs. And it seems as if many ski businesses are like bracing for impact on how that will impact the industry. What's your I know that's a heavy question. What's your small take on how is it from someone in the industry right now with the tariffs and everything involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've at first I've been super fortunate in being able to like work alongside brands that had supported me through my skiing endeavors and trying to give a brand that actually had so much value to me as Surface and Joystick a second chance at life when they had kind of fallen off. And I think it was positioned well at the time with the trajectory of where the ski industry was going. And there were a lot more boutique brands that were being able to do well. Vishnu being one, for example, that was like very popular at the time, and just saw a bit of a space to be able to do something different and to approach it in my own way, which I
Mhm.
think I've done for the past several years, and just trying to have my approach. It's really cool to be able to support skiers that I really like their vision, and to continue to support a side of the industry that's so different from the contest side that I'm participating in on a judge's sense every day. Being able to give back to street skiing and to the core in that way. But yeah, now like I'd say touching on the tariffs and just like doing business right now again, it's been really nice because from coming back in, we've been at a pretty consistent rate of growth where we've just kind of continued to roll with the momentum, small at first, and then continuing to get a little bit more substantial throughout the years, and being able to pick up, support more riders, do more things, add more pro models, do different skis, do graphics, so on and so forth. We've had a lot of opportunity, and now what I'm seeing in like, and like as with many other brands that I think have kind of been branching out in that way, and now the US political climate is really making things difficult and a time for reassessment, I think, from a lot of brands, where I just look at the sheer numbers of it and I wonder how everyone's going to continue to have a seat at the table.
Mhm.
It's
'Cause what's the English word in an industry where you start from many players and it it gets to a lower number? There's a word for that, but, in the business where either some die off or some get bought, but you get from 10 to 4, and then the new reality.
yeah, yeah,
I was trying
exactly.
to take note before the episode of how many brands I can think of,
Yeah.
Forefront, Surface, Atomic, Rossi, Dynastar, Black Crows, na 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 na. I was getting to a high number. I was like,
And
how is it viable for all these brands to survive?
exactly. And that's the thing too, is like possibly not. But I'd say there was like a big trend in the outdoor sports retail space through COVID, where there was a lot of people that were buying and getting into more sports
Mm,
during and after that, like whether in preparation and then kind of following up with being outdoors after that, that it seemed to be all of the action sports industry was just, hey, it's growing right now, like let's keep it going. And now we're at a point of shrinkage where it's becoming more difficult and more expensive for these brands to participate. And maybe you're right, like maybe there is a point where the industry is not big enough to support as many brands are out there, but I see that applying a lot more directly to the large brands. And the large brands are where I think we're about to see a major um, difference in how business has been operating in recent years. There have been brands that have been kind of picking up athletes, doing new things, and having this trajectory that had seemingly not been hampered by the looming thought of tariffs. And now, with everything happening, they're getting hit with the reality that they might have overbought. They might have way too many skis sitting in inventory that they're never going to move through, which is going to affect their ability to continue ordering and planning for future years. So
mm,
I think we're just scraping the surface on what it's going to look like with when these tariffs were put into place. I'm fortunate that our owner and my business partner with Surface Joystick and Causwell, where we were looking at this a ways in advance to try to position ourselves to weather the storm. But I really I'm not super optimistic as to how it turns out for everyone. I think that there will be the creative ones, and there will be a select few that will make it through these next period, whatever this might be, in a very strong way, and we will see brands finally falling by the wayside and not wanting to participate. Maybe not even in skiing as a broad scale thing, but in our subgenre of this
mhm,
sport, I think we might see some big companies that have seen a spark in this industry and wanted to play ball might be losing faith dealing with the amount of competitors and the global forces at hand, and might reassess their decision to participate in free skiing, our small genre of it, in the way that they have in recent years.
Because it feels like there's always been some brands that came in and came out. There was a flow, like Corrupt in the early 2010 that came in, came out. There was a Apo, came in, came out. Feels like it's been a while since we've seen that. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I see a lot of stuff where skiing has been so fragmented that it seems hard as a business to you have less. It's like if you're invested in the stock market and you're all on one stock, like Vishnu is really core and really street focused, and Solomon isn't into comps and isn't into street. They're into POW. And
Yeah.
you look at comp skiers, you look at the top comp skiers, big air, men, women, it's faction and vocal.
Yep.
Like
Yeah, pretty much.
every brand is so fragmented.
Yeah, and like hedging their bets in a direction in which they see to be the most fundamental to the marketing of it, and like that's something that, like me specifically, I never wanted to touch on the competitive world, period. Partially and due to my other side of my profession in being a judge and not wanting to give anyone the impression that I was anything less than impartial 100% of the time, but also because I see a lot more value in non-competitive skiers and non-competition skiing. But that's not to be said by
Marketing wise,
yeah, like, and just general brand value wise. Like obviously the skis are the skis, they are whatever, but the way that you pitch the brand, then you look at brands like Vocal that like clearly their contests or their brand identity is tied to competitive success in the racing realm and now translated over to park and pipe skiing. But yeah, I think that it's really going to prove time where the brands are just kind of doubling down on the things that are important to them, because the finances are not limitless in the way that they might have seemed years ago when there was this promise of this thing growing. Now there's just the threat of this shrinking, and people are being a bit more cautious, let's say, about the expenditures that they're making.
what's the outlook for Surface right now?
I think like I'm very confident in our position and we're not going anywhere. That's one thing that I'm confident and excited about, is that we've put ourselves in a position where ultimately it'll be fine. Like we'll get through this year. It may end up reassessing models and the way we approach it, and where our skis are sourced, what type of product we're bringing to market, how many different riders we're working with. But as it stands right now, we've positioned ourselves to be able to try to weather this storm, and that's pretty much, I'd say, the most anyone can really do right now in this unpredictable time frame where there's not a lot of like exciting growth plans across everyone. Everyone's just kind of getting ready to prepare for what we might be on the verge of enduring, from the tariff perspective specifically.
And it's also super unpredictable because who knows, maybe your president might change his mind and there won't be tariffs in 2 weeks. Like that's also
you never know. That guy seems to lose his mind on a daily basis. So
and then last point that I also wanted to give you a shout out, because I love people trying to create stuff inside of freeskiing. Like we talked about it maybe last time that it was a possibility, but last fall you revived the brand Causwell. That is an outerwear brand that used to exist under kind of linked to Surface skis, that I thought was making cool stuff in the early 2010s, but then died, and you revived it. Shout out for you for doing that. It's sick. Again, on the business end, I'm curious, like how did it do, how it's going and all that, but I think you're really coming in at a bit like the skis at a weird time in the history of brands, where you had brands that died like Saga or Planks. You have new brands that have come to life in the past years like Harlow or Capiche. You have brands that got into outerwear that already existed like Gibberish, let's say, who now make outerwear. Where does for you bringing in new stuff, you're business minded, where does do you fit a Causwell into all that sea of different fragmentations of outerwear?
Yeah, I mean that was like the initial issues I had with it. Even so, like Surface, the initial goal was to bring back Surface, obviously, which now I'm plus years in on trying to revamp that brand that's 20 years old, started in 2004, and bring it back to being relevant in today's ski community. Joystick and Causwell were the two brands that were also owned under the Freeski brands kind of umbrella. And then so Joystick was part two. Like once I got Surface kind of up and functioning, then I could turn my attention a little bit to trying to bring Joystick into a new light and make it relevant to a new generation of skiers, because clearly it was very important to me and to another group of skiers that were into a more niche side of the sport at its inception with Anthony Bornowski. And then that's gone pretty well as well. Like I'm very proud of where Joystick's at. The amount of people I see using the goggles and the poles that aren't on Surface skis, which is a big indicator for me as to how the success is aside from Surface. But then it really just came to a point where Causwell was the third brand. As you're mentioning, I think there was a lot of momentum built in like the early 2010s with Causwell. And then it just kind of fizzled, and it went through a couple different iterations, trying its hand in fly fishing for a while because Mike, the founder, had a passion about fly fishing, and just ultimately kind of finding its resting place where it hadn't done anything for a while. So when we actually wanted to revamp it, that was a big assessment for me, was looking at the market as, is there room for it? You know, when I was interested in making Surface try to be relevant again, it was because I saw a hole that was not being filled within the current market of skis, in a consumer that was not being focused on in the way that that consumer actually can speak for itself and will actually come and play. And so Causwell, that was kind of where I needed to come to a point of conclusion with, there has to be a reason to bring this back. This isn't just bringing it back for no reason, just to have an outerwear brand to live aside these other hard good brand that we're doing. And that's where our vision for Causwell was really to just kind of try to mesh a little bit more the progressive fits and styles of this new wave of clothing with Anytides, Vulgus. I mean, you have so many different brands that are doing these, I mean, Capiche, Harlow, that are doing these new designs that are more appealing to the type of pants specifically that the new age skiers want to ride, but then also to try to hybrid it a bit more with the technical materials that are being used by Arc'teryx and Mountain Hardwear, North Face, to try to make a unique cross section of technicality and current fashion trends. And so far, I mean, it's been a really fun process. I kind of knew that this would be a learning curve to get started with this, just because the outerwear market is so saturated, and there's so many brands, and there's so many new small brands that are popping up and doing well. And it really does remind me of the era in which Saga started back in the day, where there was a brand coming out and doing something different than everyone else was doing. And what were they doing differently at the time? The fit was a little bit different, but mainly it was the colors and the length of jackets that people were asking for. So in the wake of Saga, there was a huge influx of new brands that were trying to hit on that market. And then at a certain point, all of the big brands adopted to actually making the same stuff that they were making. And then there becomes less room for those other brands. And then at a certain point, Saga goes under because it's now run its course and it's gone away. And right now, especially so with the direct to consumer aspect of everything, it's hard to be a player in the outerwear side of it. So ultimately, I'm really pleased with where we're at this year. We're going to continue it. We're going to keep it going and try to continue to reinvent this. Joe Blount, Joe Burr on Instagram, who's one of our Surface athletes, has been really heavily involved on the design aspect. And that's something that I really have looked to him for inspiration, because I'm not in touch with what the kids want to wear nearly as much as someone that's out there living it. And that was a piece to the puzzle that I didn't want to go in doing the wrong thing. But ultimately just a major learning experience, like the product timelines on outerwear, as well as where you're sourcing these materials from, also adds a lot of complications in this increasingly difficult political climate in terms of shipping from other countries. So look to see it continue. But as to what it morphs into, I think that's something that is going to be year to year based on where we see the value in the brand. But there is no value to me in just kind of rinse and reuse what other people are doing. We'd like to kind of create our own unique niche within this outerwear full of its own niches.
It definitely seems like a challenging time for outerwear where I don't think there's a cohesive fashion trend right now. What 15-year-olds will wear is not, there used to be a time where baggy was the trend, and now it seems like for each age gap it's really different. Then every company is doing different stuff. Like Harlow is really its own thing, and you also have big established brand like North Face or Arc'teryx that are big ships that take a lot of the market share, let's say.
Yeah. And I mean, you also just like, my biggest issue is when you create a product and then you want to have people marketing it and wearing it so that you can have other people see it, and then you're selling it based on those people using it, which has kind of been the model used throughout skiing overall. In the outerwear game, everyone wants black pants. Black pants is kind of the thing that, like, everyone thinks, oh, I want pants. I don't want them to stand out too much. I want black pants. Every brand makes a black pant. So ultimately, like, what you see in that is a lot of people going to the cheapest passable option for that pair of black pants, because ultimately they black pants look very much the same. So that was like one initial thing that we did, was not produce a black pant this year. And that also, like, it made it difficult to get people to buy in because everyone wants black pants. And like, that's another thing. And I know you and I have talked so much offline about athletes and how ignorant they are to the part they actually play in the cycle, in many senses. But like,
It
in
could
an
be a
athlete,
whole episode.
oh my goodness, yeah. But like, in an athlete, not like wanting to align with a brand, wanting to support a brand, but not fundamentally being willing to wear the product that brand produces, is like, how are you not connecting these wires and understanding that that's a major red flag? And I guess that's just, everyone wants to look themselves, everyone wants to have their own identity, but ultimately when you're accepting payment or gear in exchange for promotion, you're stepping aside to the fact that now they might have a bit of a say as to what you wear. And if if that's not cool with you, you don't take that. You don't take the money, you don't take the clothes, you don't take the gear. But by accepting that money or gear, you're accepting what the company is trying to do, and that you're going to wear their gear baseline,
Mhm. And so basically, what I think you're trying to say is you've got a new brand coming up called Black Pants.
Black pants. Everyone wants them. They're not free. Nobody gets them for free. Everyone pays for black pants.
That could be a thing. Blackpants.com, man.
I
Just
think we're on to something. We probably have to cut this part so that nobody steals the idea before we get it going.
yeah. Yeah, so I guess we've talked long enough. Thanks for coming on, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man. Always a pleasure, and looking forward to doing some more judging with you in future years.
Yeah, thanks for getting me into judging. Thanks for everything you do for skiing. Like, I think you're one of the people who does the most in skiing without necessarily getting the spotlight. You know, I've had your help for video projects through the years. I know you help skiers on the other. You're a lot involved in comp skiing, but you're also involved on the other end with surface and all that. So, man, shout out to you because you're doing a lot for skiing.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it, and just I like this sport, and I've been part of it for so long that I can't bear the thought of stepping away and doing anything else. So it just kind of finds creative ways to continue to be a part of it and to try to give back and make this thing better than it was when we found it,
Yeah. When you got me into judging, I said, I don't know how long I'll do this and where I'll end up. I don't know how long you'll do this, but hopefully, if I can get on one of your panels, it'll be a checkbox. And
Yeah.
we did it this season, so just for that, I'm hyped. I got to be on one of your panels, so that's a bucket list checked off.
Yeah, that was rad. We'll definitely have more of that, depending on how long both of us do it.
Yeah.
But,
And
yeah.
good luck for the Olympics this season. I'm hyped to watch it and see people hate on you afterwards.
Yeah, thanks. There definitely will be hate, but I think I'm ready to deal with
You
it.
can't run away from it.
You can't run away from the hate. You just gotta embrace it and understand that it's gonna come, and it's only the educated hate that really will upset me at the end of it.
But I'm more than confident in you. I think you're the best guy in the business to do it. And I've met a few guys this year that will be on your panel, and they're all fucking sharp and great guys. So I'm super hyped for it.
Hell yeah. Yeah, hope it. Fingers crossed. We can't be the ones that mess this up. It's been going long enough.
It's got to be the snowboarders still.
It's got to be the snowboarders. You got to mess with them somehow.
All right, thanks, bro.
Right on. Thank you.